Ma'am, this boarding pass isn't yours. The words sliced through the first-class cabin like a blade, silencing champagne pours and laptop keyboards mid-click. 10 minutes before takeoff, flight attendant Janelle Reed stood over seat 2A, her voice dripping with accusation as she snatched the boarding pass from a composed black woman's hands and slapped it against her chest. You need to tell me right now how you got this seat. Phones lifted. A businessman in 3C hit record. Within seconds, Janelle went live on her personal social media, her camera trained on the passenger like a spotlight interrogating a suspect. The cabin became a courtroom. The woman, Dr. Amara Vance, didn't flinch, didn't raise her voice, didn't even blink. She simply waited, her hands folded in her lap, while the world watched a humiliation designed to break her. What Janelle didn't know was that the plane beneath her feet didn't belong to the airline. It belonged to the woman she was trying to shame. Follow this story to the very end, and please, like and comment with your city so I can see how far this moment of reckoning travels. The Boeing 787 sat gleaming on the tarmac at Atlanta's Hartsfield-Jackson International Airport, its engines humming softly as ground crews finished their final checks. Inside, the first-class cabin radiated the kind of quiet luxury that made passengers forget they were about to be sealed in a metal tube at 35,000 feet. Cream leather seats, ambient lighting that shifted from warm gold to cool blue. The faint scent of lavender diffused through the air vents. It was a Wednesday morning in late September, and Flight 447 to Los Angeles was running exactly on schedule. Dr. Amara Vance settled into seat 2A with the practiced ease of someone who'd spent half her life in transit. She was 42 years old, with close-cropped natural hair that framed elegant cheekbones and eyes that seemed to absorb everything without judgment. She wore a charcoal blazer over a white silk blouse, simple diamond studs in her ears, and a titanium watch that cost more than most people's cars but looked understated enough to pass unnoticed. Her carry-on, a sleek black leather briefcase, sat tucked beneath the seat in front of her. She'd already declined the pre-departure champagne, opting instead for sparkling water with lime. Amara opened her tablet and began reviewing the quarterly report from Vance Aerospace Leasing, the company she'd founded 15 years earlier with a single regional jet lease and a business plan that most investors had dismissed as ambitious to the point of delusional. Now Val owned or managed over 200 aircraft worth a combined $9 billion, serving airlines on 4 continents. She also served as managing partner of Vance Capital Partners, a transportation investment firm with equity positions in shipping companies, rail operators, and, as of 18 months ago, a 12% stake in Meridian Holdings, the parent company of the very airline whose cabin she currently occupied. She didn't advertise these facts. Amara had learned early that being underestimated was often an advantage. Across the aisle in seat 2C, a white man in his 50s tapped away at his laptop, occasionally glancing up to assess his fellow passengers with the casual entitlement of someone who considered first class his natural habitat. Behind Amara, a young couple whispered excitedly about their honeymoon in Malibu. 2 rows back, a woman in designer sunglasses scrolled through her phone, her nails clicking against the screen. The boarding process continued smoothly. Passengers filed past the galley, some pausing to compliment the cabin crew, others moving directly to their seats with earbuds already in place. Flight attendants circulated with trays of orange juice and coffee, their smiles professional and warm. Then Janelle Reed stepped into the cabin. Janelle was 28 years old and had been with the airline for 6 years, long enough to feel secure in her position, but not long enough to have developed the weathered patience of senior crew. She was petite, blonde, with the kind of cheerleader prettiness that had always opened doors for her in ways she didn't consciously recognize. She took pride in her work, genuinely believing she provided excellent service. She also took pride in her social media following, 47,000 people who tuned in regularly for her behind-the-scenes glimpses of airline life, travel tips, and the occasional passenger drama story that always seemed to gain traction. Janelle had started her shift in a good mood. She'd posted a selfie in the galley an hour earlier with the caption, "Another beautiful day at 30,000 feet meant crew life # first-class service," and it had already garnered 300 likes. But as she moved through the cabin doing her pre-flight safety check, something caught her eye. Seat 2A. The woman sitting there was black, dressed professionally, and appeared completely at ease. That last part bothered Janelle in a way she couldn't quite articulate, wouldn't have articulated even to herself. It triggered something deep in her psychological wiring, a dissonance between what she expected to see in that seat and what was actually there. She'd seen plenty of black passengers in first class before, of course, but there was something about this woman's composure, her quiet confidence, that read to Janelle as wrong. Janelle approached with her tablet, pulling up the passenger manifest. "Excuse me, ma'am," she said, her voice pitched just slightly too loud. "May I see your boarding pass?" Amara looked up from her tablet, her expression neutral. Of course. She reached into her blazer pocket and handed over the boarding pass without comment. Janelle took it, but instead of simply scanning the barcode as she'd done for every other passenger, she held it up to the light, examining it as though it might be counterfeit. "This is seat 2A, she said slowly. "First class." "Yes," Amara replied. Her voice was calm, measured. "That's my seat." "And you purchased this ticket yourself?" The question hung in the air. Around them, other passengers began to notice. The man in 2C glanced over his laptop screen. The honeymooners stopped whispering. Amar's expression didn't change. "Is there a problem with my ticket?" "I'm just verifying," Janelle said. She tapped at her tablet, frowning. "Because we've had issues lately with people using unauthorized upgrades, or tickets that weren't actually purchased by the person flying." "I see." Amara's tone remained even. "And you ask every first-class passenger these questions?" Janelle's cheeks flushed. "I ask when something seems irregular." "What seems irregular about my ticket?" "I'm just doing my job, ma'am." Janelle's voice was rising now, taking on a defensive edge. "I need you to tell me exactly how you obtained this boarding pass." The cabin had gone quiet. Passengers in rows 3, 4, and 5 were now openly watching. The woman with the designer sunglasses had lowered her phone. A businessman in row 4 slowly reached for his own phone and opened the camera app. Amara set her tablet down carefully. "I purchased the ticket through the airline's website 3 weeks ago using my credit card. The confirmation number is in your system. My identification matches the name on the ticket. I checked in online this morning. Is there something specific about my documentation that concerns you?" "Don't get defensive," Janelle snapped. "I'm just trying to understand." "I'm not defensive," Amara interrupted gently. "I'm asking you to clarify what you need from me that you haven't already received." Janelle's flush deepened. She felt the eyes of the cabin on her, felt the situation slipping out of her control in a way that made her angry. She'd started this interaction with what she believed was legitimate concern. The airline had indeed sent a memo about fraudulent upgrades the previous month, but now she felt cornered, embarrassed, and that embarrassment was curdling into something uglier. She snatched the boarding pass back from where Amara had been holding it and slapped it against Amara's chest, not hard enough to hurt, but with enough force to make a statement. "You need to tell me right now how you got this seat." The businessman in row 4 was definitely filming now. So was the woman in sunglasses. Someone in row 6 had their phone up. Amara didn't react to the physical contact. She simply looked at Janelle with those absorbing eyes and said quietly, "You just assaulted me in front of witnesses." "I did no such thing," Janelle's voice cracked. She could feel the situation spiraling, could feel her authority evaporating, and in that moment of panic, she made a decision that would alter the trajectory of her entire career. She pulled out her personal phone, opened her social media app, and went live. "Hey everyone," she said, her voice taking on the bright, confiding tone she used for her followers. "So I'm dealing with a situation here on Flight 447, and I want you all to see what we have to handle sometimes." She turned the camera toward Amara. "I have a passenger in first class who's refusing to verify how she obtained her ticket. She's being uncooperative, and I answered every question you asked," Amara said, her voice still calm but now carrying an edge of steel. "You're broadcasting me without my consent." "This is a public space," Janelle countered, the phone still trained on Amara's face. "And I'm documenting a passenger issue." The man in 2C finally spoke up. "Excuse me, but I've been sitting here the whole time. She showed you her boarding pass. She answered your questions. What exactly is the problem?" Janelle whirled on him. "Sir, this doesn't concern you. Actually, you're broadcasting this to the entire internet, so it kind of does concern all of us," the man said. His phone was out now too, recording from a different angle. The senior flight attendant, a woman named Patricia, who'd been with the airline for 23 years, emerged from the galley. She was in her early 50s, with gray-streaked hair pulled back in a tight bun, and the kind of unflappable demeanor that came from having handled everything from medical emergencies to mid-air fistfights. "Janelle," she said sharply, "what's going on?" "I'm handling a verification issue," Janelle said, but her voice had lost its confidence. Patricia looked at Amara, then at the phone's recording, then back at Janelle. "Put your phone away, now." "But that's not a request." Janelle lowered her phone but didn't end the live stream. Her followers were multiplying by the second. The viewer count had jumped from 200 to over 1,000 in less than 2 minutes. Comments were flooding in. "OMG, what's happening? Is this real? Flight attendant going off." Patricia leaned in close to Janelle and hissed, "You're live streaming a passenger dispute? Are you out of your mind?" But it was too late. The damage was already metastasizing through the digital ecosystem. Someone in the cabin had texted a friend. That friend had posted on Twitter. Within 5 minutes, a hashtag had emerged. #FirstClassFraud. Within 10, local news stations in Atlanta were picking up the feed. Patricia turned to Amara with an apologetic expression. "Ma'am, I sincerely apologize for this disruption. Your ticket is obviously valid. Please let me—" "I want her off this plane," Janelle said suddenly, her voice loud enough to carry through the entire first-class cabin. "I don't feel safe with her aboard." Patricia's eyes went wide. "Janelle, I'm serious. I'm formally stating that I feel threatened by this passenger's behavior. That's within my authority, isn't it? To refuse service to someone I perceive as a threat?" The cabin erupted in murmurs. The businessman in 3C laughed, actually laughed, in disbelief. "You've got to be kidding me." "Ma'am," Patricia said to Amara, her voice tight with mortification. "Please understand I don't agree with this, but once a crew member makes a formal safety declaration, I have to follow protocol. I need to call the flight manager." Amara finally allowed herself a small, humorless smile. "By all means." Patricia disappeared into the cockpit. Janelle remained standing in the aisle, her phone still streaming, her face flushed with a mixture of triumph and panic. She was reading comments aloud now. "You go, girl. Don't let anyone intimidate you." She looked at Amara. "People support me. They know what I'm dealing with." "Do they?" Amara said. It wasn't a question. The woman in designer sunglasses stood up from her seat in row 3. She was tall, mid-30s, with the kind of polished appearance that suggested money and education. "Excuse me," she said, addressing the cabin at large. "I'm an attorney with Morrison & Hale in Atlanta. I've been recording this entire interaction, and I'm prepared to serve as a witness that this woman," she gestured to Amara, "has done absolutely nothing except answer questions calmly while being harassed." "Thank you," Amara said quietly. The attorney nodded. "This is textbook discrimination. I've handled cases exactly like this." Janelle's expression hardened. "You don't know what you're talking about. I have legitimate concerns." "Based on what?" the attorney pressed. "Her ticket is valid. Her ID matches. She's been nothing but cooperative. What exactly are your concerns based on?" The question hung in the air, unanswerable in any way that wouldn't reveal the ugly truth beneath Janelle's actions. The cockpit door opened, and Patricia emerged, followed by a man in his late 40s wearing the crisp uniform of a senior flight manager. Derek Kane had worked for the airline for 19 years and had clawed his way up from baggage handler to his current position through a combination of competence and careful political maneuvering. He was good at his job, but he was also deeply invested in protecting the airline's interests, and by extension, his own career. He took in the scene with a practiced eye. The phone's recording, the hostile flight attendant, the unusually composed passenger in 2A who was at the center of it all. His expression revealed nothing. "Good morning," he said, his voice carrying the smooth authority of someone used to diffusing situations. "I'm Derek Kane, senior flight manager. I understand we have a concern about ticket verification." "Yes," Janelle jumped in before anyone else could speak. "This passenger has been evasive about how she obtained her first-class ticket, and when I asked reasonable questions, she became hostile." "That's a lie," the businessman in 3C interrupted. "I've been sitting right here. She answered every question. Your flight attendant is the one who got hostile. Derek held up a hand. Sir, I appreciate your input, but I need to speak with the passenger directly. He turned to Amara. Ma'am, may I see your boarding pass and identification? Amara handed both over without comment. Derek examined them with the same theatrical scrutiny Janelle had used, though his performance was more subtle. He pulled out his tablet and began tapping through screens. Dr. Vance, he said slowly, reading from the passenger manifest. Seat 2A, purchased, 3 weeks ago, premium member status. He looked up. Everything appears to be in order. Then we're done here, Amara said. Not quite. Derek's tone remained pleasant, but something had shifted. I'm seeing some irregularities in the payment processing. The system flagged this ticket for additional verification. It was a lie, and everyone in the cabin knew it. The attorney in row 3 actually laughed. You're going to claim system irregularities on a ticket purchased 3 weeks ago? A ticket that's already been checked in, processed, and scanned at the gate? Derek's smile didn't waver. Ma'am, I don't know who you are, but this is an operational matter. I told you who I am. I'm an attorney, and I'm documenting this entire interaction as evidence of discrimination. Nobody's being discriminated against, Derek said, his voice hardening slightly. I'm simply following verification protocols that apply to all passengers. Really? The attorney gestured around the cabin. Have you verified anyone else's ticket with this level of scrutiny? Have you questioned anyone else about how they obtained their seat? Derek's jaw tightened. He was losing control of the narrative, and he knew it. The live stream was still going. Janelle hadn't ended it despite Patricia's earlier command, and the viewer count was now over 5,000 and climbing. This was going to be a problem, possibly a lawsuit, definitely a PR nightmare. But Derek had been in the airline industry long enough to know that the calculus of these situations often came down to one question. Who had more power? He looked at Amara, at her calm expression, her quality clothing, her complete lack of fear, and made a calculation. Maybe she was wealthy. Maybe she was even important in some context he didn't understand. But she was sitting alone, and he had the weight of the airline's authority behind him. He had security he could call, he had protocols he could cite, and he had 19 years of experience that told him passengers, no matter how confident, ultimately backed down when faced with the threat of being removed from a flight. Dr. Vance, he said, his tone shifting to something harder. I'm going to need you to deplane for additional verification. This is a standard security procedure, and refusing to comply will result in you being barred from this flight and potentially from future travel with our airline. The cabin exploded. This is insane, the businessman in 3C shouted. I'm calling the ACLU right now, the attorney said, her phone already out. Don't you dare move her, a woman from row 5 called out. This is discrimination, pure and simple. But others remained silent. A couple in row 4 exchanged uncomfortable glances but said nothing. An older man in row 6 looked away. The ambient support was real, but so was the ambient complicity. The passengers who agreed this was wrong but weren't willing to risk their own comfort or travel plans to intervene. Amara sat perfectly still, her hands folded in her lap, her expression unreadable. She was making a choice in that moment, calibrating her response with the same precision she used in boardroom negotiations. She could cooperate, get off the plane, file a complaint later through proper channels. It would be the path of least resistance. It would also be completely ineffective. Or she could hold her ground. No, she said quietly. Derek blinked. Excuse me? No, I'm not deplaning. My ticket is valid, my identification is valid, and I've broken no laws and violated no policies. I'm staying in my seat. Ma'am, I'm giving you a direct instruction, and I'm refusing to comply with an unlawful instruction. You have no grounds to remove me from this aircraft. Derek's face flushed. He pulled out his radio. Security to gate 17. We have a passenger refusing to deplane. The attorney was recording everything, so were at least 7 other passengers now. The live stream viewer count hit 10,000. Amara reached into her blazer pocket, slowly, deliberately, making sure everyone could see the motion, and withdrew a simple white business card. She held it between 2 fingers, not yet offering it to Derek. Before security arrives, she said, her voice carrying through the silent cabin, I think you should bring the captain out here. Derek actually laughed. The captain is busy preparing for takeoff. The captain, Amara interrupted, her tone sharpening for the first time, is going to want to be part of this conversation. Trust me. Something in her voice made Derek pause. It was the absolute certainty, the complete lack of bluffing. He'd heard passengers make threats before. I know the CEO. My lawyer will hear about this. You have no idea who I am. And they always had a desperate quality, a hope that the bluff would work. This was different. This was someone stating a fact. Fine, he said curtly. He keyed his radio. Captain Hernandez to the cabin, please. While they waited, the cabin remained frozen in a moment of collective tension. Janelle's live stream continued, her commentary growing more frantic as she tried to control the narrative for her followers. Patricia stood near the galley, her face pale, clearly recognizing that this situation had spiraled far beyond normal operational bounds. The passengers watched with the horrified fascination of people witnessing a car crash in slow motion. The cockpit door opened and Captain Robert Hernandez emerged. He was 56 years old, a veteran pilot with 32 years in the air and a reputation for steady competence. He was also deeply tired of the increasing corporatization of airlines, tired of management decisions that prioritized metrics over people, tired of dealing with situations that never should have escalated to requiring his intervention. "What's the problem?" he asked, his voice carrying the mild irritation of someone who'd been pulled away from pre-flight checks. Derek gestured to Amara. Passenger refusing to comply with a deplaning instruction. Ticket verification issues. Captain Hernandez looked at Amara, then at the forest of phones recording, then at Janelle's live stream still broadcasting. His expression darkened. "You're streaming this?" "I'm documenting," Janelle started. "End it. Now." "That's a direct order." Janelle's finger hesitated over her phone, then tapped. The stream went dark. But the damage was already done. Multiple recordings existed, screenshots had been captured, and the hashtag #had first class fraud was now trending nationally. Captain Hernandez turned back to Derek. "What ticket verification issues?" "The system flagged her purchase for..." "Show me." Derek pulled up his tablet, his confidence wavering. He scrolled through screens, his movements becoming less certain. Amara finally extended the business card toward the captain. "Captain Hernandez, I think you'll want to see this." He took the card, glanced at it, and went absolutely still. The color drained from his face. His eyes moved from the card to Amara and back again, and when he spoke, his voice was very, very careful. "Dr. Vance, I didn't realize." "No reason you should have," Amara said gently. "We've never met." Derek leaned over to look at the card. The text was simple, elegant. Dr. Amara Vance, founder and CEO, Vance Aerospace Leasing Managing Partner, Vance. Capital Partners. Below that, a phone number and email address. Nothing flashy. Nothing that screamed power. Just facts. Derek's expression went from confusion to dawning horror as the implications assembled themselves in his mind. Vance Aerospace Leasing. Val. They were one of the largest aircraft leasing companies in the world. And if she was the founder, the CEO, that meant, "Captain," Amara said, her voice still calm but now carrying an unmistakable authority. "Can you tell me the registration number of this aircraft?" Captain Hernandez swallowed. N847VA. "And do you know who owns N847VA? The captain's voice was barely a whisper. "Vance Aerospace Leasing." The businessman in 3C let out a low whistle. The attorney in row 3 was smiling now, a sharp, delighted expression. Around the cabin, passengers who'd been following the conversation began to understand. Phones that had lowered started rising again. Amara turned her attention to Derek. "This aircraft, the one you're standing in right now, is leased to your airline from my company. The lease agreement, if you'd like me to recite it, was signed 18 months ago for a term of 12 years at a monthly rate of $975,000. Derek's mouth opened and closed soundlessly. "But that's not all," Amara continued, her tone conversational, almost friendly. "Vance Capital Partners, which I also run, holds a 12% equity position in Meridian Holdings, your airline's parent company, which means I'm not just your lessor, I'm also technically one of your employers." The cabin had gone beyond silent. It had achieved a kind of vacuum of sound, a space where even breathing seemed too loud. Janelle, who'd been standing frozen near the galley, finally found her voice. You can't. This is... Amara turned to look at her, really look at her for the first time. Not with anger, not with triumph, with something far more devastating, mild disappointment. You humiliated me, Amara said quietly. You put your hands on me. You broadcast me to thousands of people without my consent, trying to shame me based on nothing but your own assumptions. And you did it all because you saw a black woman in first class and decided I didn't belong there. That's not... I never... Janelle's voice cracked. Do you know how many times I've sat in first class and been asked how I obtained my ticket? How many times I've had flight attendants question whether I'm in the right seat? How many times I've watched white passengers board with no scrutiny while I get treated like a suspect? Amara's voice remained level, but now there was steel underneath. I have built 2 multi-billion-dollar companies from nothing. I employ 6,000 people. I have flown over 3 million miles in my lifetime. And you looked at me and saw someone who needed to be put in her place. Tears were streaming down Janelle's face now. I'm sorry, I didn't know. You shouldn't have needed to know. That's the point. Captain Hernandez cleared his throat. Dr. Vance, on behalf of the airline, I sincerely apologize. Captain, you're not the one who needs to apologize. You just got here. Amar's attention shifted to Derek. But he does. And so does your company. Derek seemed to be struggling to form words. When they finally came, they sounded strangled. Dr. Vance, this was a misunderstanding. No, Amara interrupted. A misunderstanding is when someone gets confused about gate numbers. This was discrimination, captured on multiple recordings, broadcast live to thousands of people. And it happened because your employee made assumptions based on my race. And you... She looked directly at Derek. You doubled down on it. You lied about system irregularities. You threatened to remove me from a flight I had every right to be on. You did all of that without asking a single relevant question, without following any actual verification protocol. Derek's face had gone from red to gray. His career was flashing before his eyes. The years of work, the careful climbing, all of it potentially destroyed in the last 15 minutes. The attorney in row 3 spoke up again. For the record, I have clear footage of the flight attendant making physical contact with Dr. Vance, making false accusations, and live streaming without consent. I also have footage of Mr. Kane, she checked the name tag, lying about system irregularities and threatening removal without cause. I'm happy to provide all of this to Dr. Vance's legal team. Thank you, Amara said. She pulled out her phone, a simple gesture that made both Janelle and Derek flinch, and placed a call on speaker. It rang twice before a crisp voice answered. Meridian Holdings, Regional Director's Office. This is Dr. Amara Vance. I need to speak with Director Chen immediately. There was a pause. One moment, Dr. Vance. The hold music played through the cabin speakers. Ironically, it was a jazzy instrumental version of Fly Me to the Moon. Passengers sat transfixed. This wasn't just a confrontation anymore. It was theater. A new voice came on the line, male, concerned. Dr. Vance, this is Richard Chen. How can I help you? Richard, I'm sitting on Flight 447 from Atlanta to Los Angeles, which is currently delayed because your flight manager, Derek Kane, attempted to remove me from first class based on fabricated concerns about ticket verification, after your flight attendant, Janelle Reed, physically assaulted me and broadcast me without consent to social media while making discriminatory accusations. The silence on the other end of the line lasted exactly 3 seconds, long enough for Richard Chen to calculate the legal, financial, and reputational implications of what he'd just heard. Dr. Vance, is Captain Hernandez there? I'm here, the captain said. Can you confirm these events? Captain Hernandez looked miserable. I arrived late to the situation, but yes, from what I observed and what multiple passengers have confirmed, Dr. Vance's account is accurate. It's all been recorded by multiple witnesses. Another pause. Put Derek on. Derek took the phone with a shaking hand. Sir, I can explain. Derek, you're suspended effective immediately. Badge and credentials to the captain. You're not to have any further contact with passengers or crew. Someone will escort you from the airport. Derek's hand tightened on the phone. Sir, please. Do you have any idea what you've done? Do you have any idea who Dr. Vance is? This is a catastrophic failure of judgment. We will discuss your employment status after a full investigation, but right now, you need to leave the aircraft. Derek handed the phone back to Amara, his face slack with shock. Richard, Amara said, I also need Ms. Reed removed from this flight and from duty pending investigation. Of course, absolutely. Captain Hernandez, please arrange alternative crew. And Dr. Vance, I want you to know that I will personally oversee... Richard, Amara interrupted gently, we can discuss corporate response later. Right now I need this flight to depart on time with appropriate crew. Can you make that happen? Yes, absolutely. I'll have replacement crew there within 20 minutes. Then let's talk tomorrow, 9 a.m. Conference call with your legal team and your head of operations. We'll be ready. Amara ended the call and looked at Captain Hernandez. I assume you'll need to file an incident report? Yes, ma'am. Good. Make it thorough. Derek stood in the aisle like a man in a dream, still processing what had just happened. Patricia gently touched his arm. Derek, you need to go. He stumbled toward the exit, his credentials already unclipped from his belt. As he passed Amara's seat, he stopped. I was just... You were just doing your job? Amara finished. No, your job was to ensure passenger safety and comfort. Your job was to follow actual protocols, not invent fake ones to justify removing someone you decided didn't belong. Your job was to ask questions before making assumptions. You failed at all of it. Derek left without another word. Janelle was crying openly now, mascara running down her cheeks. I'm so sorry, she whispered. I'm so sorry. Amara looked at her for a long moment. You should be, but not because of who I turned out to be. You should be sorry because you would have done this to any black woman in that seat. You should be sorry because you weaponized your position and your social media following to humiliate someone for the crime of existing in a space you didn't think they deserved. And you should be sorry because there are probably dozens of people you've treated this way who didn't have the resources to fight back. Patricia led Janelle off the aircraft, the young flight attendant's shoulders shaking with sobs. The cabin remained silent. Then, slowly, someone in row 6 started clapping. The attorney joined in. Within seconds, the entire first-class cabin was applauding, not in celebration of someone getting owned or fired, but in recognition of something deeper. The rare moment when power got held accountable, when dignity got defended, when the invisible structures that sustained everyday discrimination got forced into the light. Amara didn't acknowledge the applause. She simply reopened her tablet and returned to her quarterly report, her expression calm, as if the last 30 minutes had been nothing more than a minor interruption to her morning. Captain Hernandez approached her seat. Dr. Vance, I want you to know that I had no idea this was happening until I was called out. If I had known, I believe you, Captain, and I appreciate that you took immediate action once you understood the situation. For whatever it's worth, I've been with this airline for 32 years. I've never been more ashamed of our company than I am right now. Amara looked up at him. Then help me fix it. He nodded slowly. What do you need? Real training, not the check-the-box diversity seminars where everyone learns nothing. Real conversation about bias, real accountability when these situations happen, real consequences that aren't just about covering liability, and a passenger advocacy system so that people who don't have my leverage can get justice too. I'll push for it. I promise. Good. Replacement crew arrived 18 minutes later. A senior flight attendant named Marcus, who'd been pulled from a different flight and briefed on the situation during his sprint through the terminal. He was black, in his 40s, with 20 years of service and the kind of unflappable professionalism that came from handling every situation imaginable. He stopped by Amara's seat as the cabin prepared for departure. Dr. Vance, I'm Marcus Williams. I'll be your lead flight attendant for this trip. I was told what happened, and I want to say, on behalf of the good people who work for this airline, I'm deeply sorry. Thank you, Marcus. I also want you to know I've dealt with this stuff my whole career. Different versions of it, but the same root. And I've never seen anyone handle it the way you just did. Amara smiled, a real smile this time, warm and genuine. I've had a lot of practice. I bet you have. He handed her a bottle of water. We'll get you to Los Angeles with the service you should have received from the beginning. As the aircraft finally pushed back from the gate, 43 minutes late, the businessman in 3C leaned across the aisle. Dr. Vance, I'm James Morrison. I run a venture capital firm in San Francisco. What you did back there, I've never seen anything like it. I just held my ground. No, you did more than that. You made them see. Most people in your position would have just gotten off the plane, called a lawyer, and dealt with it later. You made them confront it in real time. Because dealing with it later wouldn't have changed anything for the next person, or the person after that. James nodded slowly. You mind if I ask you something? How did you stay so calm? I was ready to lose my mind, and it wasn't even happening to me. Amara considered the question. Because anger, in that moment, would have let them dismiss me, would have let them say I was being difficult, aggressive, unreasonable. They needed to see that I was completely in control, completely justified, and completely unafraid. That's what made them question their assumptions. That must take enormous discipline. It takes practice, Amara corrected, and it takes being tired enough of this happening that you decide. Not this time. Not today. The plane lifted off, banking west over the Atlanta skyline. Amara watched the city fall away beneath her, its sprawl of neighborhoods and highways and centers of power growing smaller, more manageable from altitude. She thought about Janelle, probably in an Uber by now, her career in ruins, her social media blow-up, a different kind from the one she'd intended. She thought about Derek, suspended, facing investigation, his 19 years of careful climbing erased in 15 minutes. She didn't feel satisfaction. She felt something more complex, a kind of weary validation. This had needed to happen. The recordings would circulate, the story would spread. And maybe, just maybe, the next time a flight attendant saw a black woman in first class, they'd remember what happened to Janelle Reed and think twice before making assumptions. Or maybe they wouldn't. Maybe this would change nothing in the broader scope of things. But it would change things for this airline, because Amara had leverage and she intended to use it. She pulled out her phone and began drafting an email to Richard Chen, outlining exactly what she expected from the airline in response to this incident. Not just firings, not just apologies, real policy changes, real training, real accountability structures. The attorney from row 3 appeared at her elbow. Dr. Vance, sorry to interrupt. I'm Sarah Kim. I gave you my card earlier. I remember. I wanted to let you know I handle civil rights litigation. If you want to pursue this legally, I'd be honored to represent you. Pro bono. Amara studied her. Why pro bono? Sarah smiled. Because what just happened? That's going to reverberate. The recordings are already everywhere. First-class fraud is trending number 2 nationally. This is going to be a case study in how to handle discrimination with power and dignity. I want to be part of making sure the legal response matches the moral clarity of what you did. Send me your information. I'll call you tomorrow after I speak with the airline's legal team. Perfect. Sarah started to leave, then turned back. Can I ask you something? Were you scared at all? When they threatened to remove you? Amara thought about it. Honestly, no. I've been scared before, in situations with a lot less at stake. But I've also spent 15 years building companies in industries that didn't want women, didn't want black people, definitely didn't want black women. I've walked into rooms where I was the only person who looked like me and had to demand my seat at tables where everyone assumed I was there to serve coffee. You develop a kind of muscle memory for these confrontations, and you learn that fear is usually about uncertainty. I wasn't uncertain. I knew exactly who I was, what my rights were, and what would happen when they finally figured out their mistake. That's remarkable. It's exhausting, Amara corrected, but necessary. As Sarah returned to her seat, Marcus appeared with a tray. Dr. Vance, can I get you anything? We have a full meal service, or if you'd prefer something simple. Coffee would be wonderful, black, no sugar. Coming right up. The flight settled into its routine. Passengers around her gradually returned to their laptops, their books, their phones. The moment of collective intensity faded into individual concerns, but Amara noticed the glances, other passengers looking at her with expressions that ranged from admiration to curiosity to something like hope. A young black woman from row 8 made her way forward, ostensibly heading to the bathroom but pausing by Amara's seat. She was maybe 25, dressed in business casual, her hands fidgeting with her phone. "Dr. Vance?" she said quietly. "I'm sorry to bother you, but I just wanted to say thank you. I've had stuff like this happen to me, not as bad but similar, and I never knew what to do. Watching you handle that, it showed me that we don't have to just accept it." Amara set down her tablet. "What's your name?" "Keisha. Keisha Washington." "What do you do, Keisha?" "I'm a software engineer. I work for a startup in LA. "And have you had experiences like this on flights before?" Keisha nodded. "A few times. Nothing I could really prove, but yeah. Questions about whether I'm in the right seat. Extra scrutiny. That feeling of not belonging." "Here's what I want you to know," Amara said. "You do belong. In first class, in executive suites, in every space where your talent and hard work have earned you a place. And when someone questions that, you have every right to push back. You don't need to be a CEO to demand dignity." Keisha's eyes were bright. "How do you stay so strong?" "By remembering I'm not just fighting for myself. Every time I hold my ground, I'm making it a little bit easier for the next woman who looks like us. That's not a burden, that's a privilege." They talked for a few more minutes, about Keisha's work, about the challenges of being a black woman in tech, about strategies for handling microaggressions and overt discrimination. When Keisha finally returned to her seat, she walked a little taller. Marcus brought the coffee, along with a small plate of shortbread cookies. "On the house," he said with a wink. "Well, everything's on the house in first class, but you know what I mean." "Thank you, Marcus. Can I tell you something?" He lowered his voice. "I've been wanting to quit this job for 2 years. The way they treat passengers, the way they treat crew, the constant pressure to do more with less. But I stay because sometimes I can be the buffer between the airline's worst impulses and people who just want to get from point A to point B with their humanity intact. What you did today, that reminded me why it matters. You're good at your job, Marcus. I can tell. I try. But I shouldn't have to try so hard just to treat people like people, you know?" "I do know. And that's what we're going to change," he smiled. "Looking forward to it." Amara spent the rest of the flight working, answering emails, reviewing contracts, preparing notes for her call with Richard Chen, but part of her attention remained on the broader implications of what had just happened. The recordings were out there, multiplying through social media, being shared and commented on and analyzed. #first-class fraud had been reclaimed by supporters, transformed from an accusation into an indictment of the airline's behavior. By the time they landed in Los Angeles, the story had hit major news outlets. CNN had picked it up. So had NBC, ABC, the New York Times, the Washington Post. The airline's stock had dropped 2% on the news, not catastrophic, but enough to get the board's attention. As Amara deplaned, thanking Marcus and waving to Captain Hernandez, she found herself surrounded by other passengers who wanted to shake her hand, to tell her their own stories of discrimination, to express gratitude for what she'd done. She accepted it all with grace, but without false modesty. She'd done what needed doing, nothing more. Sarah Kim walked with her through the terminal. "You've got the airline on the defensive. They're going to want to settle fast, make this go away." "I don't want it to go away," Amara said. "I want it to matter." "Then we make sure it matters." Outside in the Los Angeles sunshine, Amara's driver waited with her usual car. But before she got in, she turned back to look at the airport, at the streams of travelers moving through, each carrying their own stories, their own dignity, their own right to be treated with basic respect. This had been one moment on one flight, but moments had power. Moments could cascade. Moments could change systems if you refused to let them be forgotten. She got in the car, pulled out her laptop, and began writing the memo that would reshape how an entire airline approached passenger interactions. It was detailed, specific, uncompromising. It demanded accountability structures, mandatory training with real consequences, a passenger advocacy hotline with independent oversight, and quarterly reporting on discrimination complaints to the board. It was going to be uncomfortable for them. It was going to cost money. It was going to require admitting fault, but they were going to do it. Because Amara wasn't just a passenger they'd wronged. She was the woman who owned their planes, and she'd just reminded them what power looked like when it served justice instead of ego. The car merged onto the highway, Los Angeles sprawling before her. Somewhere behind her, Janelle Reed was facing the consequences of her actions. Somewhere, Derek Kane was explaining to his family why he'd been suspended. Somewhere, Richard Chen was in an emergency meeting trying to figure out how to contain a situation that was already far beyond containment. And somewhere, in airports across the country, in first-class cabins and economy seats alike, Black women who'd been questioned about their tickets, their presence, their right to occupy space were watching the videos and feeling something shift. Not revolution, not overnight change, but the possibility that the next time it happened, they could say no. They could hold their ground. They could demand the dignity they'd always deserved. Amara smiled to herself and opened her quarterly report. She still had work to do. The conference call began at exactly 9 a.m. Pacific time, which meant it was noon in Atlanta, where Richard Chen sat in a glass-walled conference room surrounded by 6 other executives, all of them looking like they hadn't slept. Amara could picture the scene perfectly. The worried faces, the lukewarm coffee, the stack of printouts showing social media analytics that got worse with every refresh. She sat in her corner office on the 42nd floor of a Century City high-rise, Los Angeles spread out beneath her like a circuit board of possibility, and listened to Richard's carefully prepared opening statement with the patience of someone who'd already won. Dr. Vance, first let me say again how deeply sorry we are for what happened on Flight 447, Richard began, his voice carrying the rehearsed cadence of corporate damage control. We've conducted a preliminary review, and we recognize that our employees failed to meet the standards of service and respect that we strive for. Failed to meet standards, Amar repeated, her tone neutral. Is that how you're characterizing what happened? Your flight attendant physically assaulted me, broadcast me without consent while making racist accusations, and your flight manager fabricated policy violations to justify removing me from a flight I had every legal right to be on. That's not a failure to meet standards. That's discrimination, Richard. Let's use accurate language. There was a pause. She heard papers rustling, someone clearing their throat. You're absolutely right, Richard said, and she gave him credit for not trying to soften it further. It was discrimination, and we're prepared to take full responsibility. Good. Then let's talk about what full responsibility looks like. Amara pulled up the document she'd drafted the previous evening, 12 pages of specific, actionable demands. I'm sending you a memo right now. I want you to read Section 1 aloud so everyone on this call understands what I'm asking for. Her assistant, Monica, had joined the conference line from the outer office. At Amara's nod, she sent the document. 30 seconds of silence followed while people opened files and scrolled. Richard's voice came back, more careful now. Section 1. Immediate actions. Subsection A. Janelle Reed's employment is terminated effective immediately, with documentation of the termination citing discrimination and violation of passenger dignity policies. Not service failures, Amara interjected. Not procedural violations. The documentation needs to specifically state discrimination. Continue. Subsection B. Derek Kane's suspension is converted to termination following completion of the investigation, unless said investigation reveals mitigating factors not currently apparent in the documented evidence. There won't be mitigating factors, Amara said. He lied about system irregularities, threatened an unlawful removal, and doubled down on discrimination when given multiple opportunities to correct course. But I'm allowing the investigation to complete because I want this done properly. Next. Subsection C. All crew members who witnessed the incident without intervening will undergo mandatory retraining on discrimination response protocols and passenger advocacy. One of the other voices on the call spoke up. A woman, older, with the slight rasp of someone who'd spent decades in boardrooms. Dr. Vance, this is Margaret Torres, head of HR. I need to push back on subsection C. Our crew members aren't required to intervene in operational decisions made by flight managers. Holding them accountable for Derek Kane's actions sets a problematic precedent. You're right, Amar said. They're not required to intervene, but they should be. That's exactly the culture I'm asking you to change. When discrimination happens, silence is complicity. Your crew members watched a passenger being humiliated and removed without cause. and most of them said nothing. The ones who did speak up, the passengers, the attorney in row 3, they had no training, no authority, and no obligation, but they recognized injustice and responded. Your trained professionals should be doing better. With respect, Margaret continued, you're asking us to put crew members in a position where they might have to defy direct orders from management. Yes, that's exactly what I'm asking, because following unlawful orders doesn't stop being wrong just because someone with a higher rank gave them. Amara's voice remained calm, but the steel underneath was unmistakable. You want to know what the alternative looks like? The alternative is an environment where discrimination gets institutional protection because everyone's too worried about chain of command to speak up. Is that the precedent you prefer? Silence. Then Richard's voice. Margaret, let's table this for now and continue through the document. We can come back to specific implementation questions. They moved through Section 2, which outlined new training requirements. Not the standard online modules that employees click through while checking email, but intensive in-person sessions facilitated by actual civil rights experts. Role-playing scenarios. Conversations about implicit bias that went beyond checking boxes. Amara had researched programs that actually worked, that actually changed behavior, and she'd listed them specifically. This level of training is going to be expensive, said another voice. Male, with the clipped efficiency of a CFO doing mental math. We're looking at roughly $42 million for full implementation across all crew and management. How much did your stock drop yesterday? Amara asked. A pause. Approximately $400 million in market cap. Then $42 million is a bargain. And frankly, if you'd invested this money in proper training 5 years ago, you wouldn't have lost the $400 million yesterday. Continue to Section 3. Section 3 was where she'd put the structural changes, the ones that would outlast the news cycle and prevent this from happening again. A passenger advocacy hotline, independently operated, where travelers could report discrimination in real time. Mandatory incident reporting requirements whenever a passenger was asked to deplane, with supervisor-level approval required before any removal could proceed. Quarterly reporting to the board on all discrimination complaints, with specific demographic breakdowns and resolution outcomes. Some of these measures seem redundant with existing policies, Richard said carefully. Your existing policies failed. That's how we got here. Fair point. They worked through the document for 90 minutes. Sometimes the airline's lawyers pushed back, gently, because everyone on the call understood the power dynamics at play. Sometimes Amara compromised, accepting alternative language or adjusted timelines. But the core demands remained non-negotiable. Real change, real accountability, real consequences for discrimination. Finally, Richard said, Dr. Vance, we're prepared to implement everything in this document. We'll need 60 days for full rollout, but we can begin immediately with the terminations, the new approval protocols, and the advocacy hotline. Is that acceptable? It's a start. But I want to add one more thing that's not in the memo. She heard the wariness in the silence. I want to create a victims fund, Amar continued, for passengers who've experienced discrimination on your flights in the past 3 years, but didn't have the resources or leverage to get justice. A process where they can submit their stories, have them reviewed by an independent panel, and receive compensation when discrimination is verified. I want you to fund it with $10 million. $10 million? The CFO's voice cracked slightly. You heard me, and I want the review panel to include civil rights attorneys, diversity experts, and passenger advocates. No airline employees, no one with a financial stake in minimizing complaints. Real independence. Dr. Vance, Richard said slowly, what you're describing could open us up to thousands of claims. Good, because there probably are thousands of people you've wronged. This is your chance to make it right. We need to discuss this with our board, then discuss it. But understand that if I don't see a commitment to this fund within 2 weeks, I'll be taking a different approach. I'll be using my position as a shareholder to force the conversation at the next board meeting. I'll be giving interviews about everything that happened. I'll be making this a public fight instead of a private resolution. Your choice. Richard exhaled. We'll have an answer for you within 10 days. Good. Now, let's talk about my personal settlement. This was the part they'd been waiting for. The number that would make this all go away, the check they could write to close the chapter. "We're prepared to offer $5 million, Richard said, plus a formal apology, a commitment to the policy changes we've discussed, and an NDA that, no." "I'm sorry? I don't want your money," Amara said, "and I'm definitely not signing an NDA. What happened on that flight is a matter of public record. It's been seen by millions of people. You don't get to pay me to be quiet about it." "Then, what do you want?" "I want a written commitment to every policy change we've discussed today, signed by your CEO and delivered to my office within 72 hours. I want quarterly progress reports on implementation, submitted to me as a shareholder. I want a seat on the Passenger Experience Committee of your board. Not for me personally, but for a civil rights advocate I'll nominate. And I want you to use what happened as a case study in your training materials, with my full participation in developing the curriculum." "You want to be part of the training?" Margaret from HR sounded genuinely surprised. "I want to make sure it's real. I want to sit in those sessions and hear what you're telling your employees. I want to review the materials and push back when they're inadequate. I want to be an active participant in making sure this changes your culture, not just your public relations talking points." Another long silence. Then Richard said, "Dr. Vance, I think we can work with that. But I have to ask, why? Why invest this much time and energy into fixing our company when you could just take a settlement and walk away?" Amara looked out at Los Angeles, at the buildings catching morning light, at the invisible networks of people moving through their days, unaware that a conversation 42 floors up was reshaping the future of air travel in small but meaningful ways. "Because I fly a lot," she said simply. "Because I'm tired of having these experiences. Because there's a 25-year-old black woman out there right now who's going to board one of your flights next month, and I want her to be treated with dignity. Because I have the leverage to force change, and it would be morally bankrupt not to use it. Because this isn't just about me. It never was." "I understand," Richard said, and for the first time he sounded like he actually meant it. The call ended with commitments to reconvene in 1 week, after the airline's legal team had reviewed everything and prepared implementation timelines. Amara hung up and sat in silence for a moment, the weight of what she'd just done settling over her. This was going to be months of work, reviewing training materials, sitting in on sessions, holding them accountable. It would have been so much easier to take the money and move on. But easier had never been Amara's priority. Monica appeared in the doorway. She was 29, brilliant, efficient, and one of the few people Amara trusted completely. "How'd it go?" "They're going to do it, not because they want to, but because they don't have a choice." "Good. Also, you have about 200 interview requests. CNN, MSNBC, NPR, The New York Times, The Washington Post, local stations in every major market. Everyone wants to talk to you. Start with NPR and The Times. I'll do those this week. The rest can wait until we have the written commitment from the airline. I want to be able to point to concrete actions, not just promises." "Smart." Monica hesitated. "Can I ask you something personal?" "Go ahead." "Did you plan for this to happen the way it did?" Amara smiled. "No, I hoped I'd never have to use that business card the way I did. But I've learned to be prepared for the moments when dignity requires power. My grandmother used to tell me, 'Baby, you can't always control how people treat you, but you can control whether you accept it.' This was me not accepting it." Her phone buzzed. "Sarah Kim, the attorney from the flight," Amara answered. "Dr. Vance, I've been going through the footage frame by frame," Sarah said without preamble. "We have 17 separate recordings from different angles. The physical contact is clear. The discriminatory statements are documented. The fabricated policy violations are on record. If you wanted to pursue civil litigation beyond the airline settlement, you'd have an absolutely bulletproof case." "I know. But litigation isn't the goal. Change is." "I figured you'd say that, so I have a different proposal. Let me help you with the Victims Fund, the review process, the verification protocols, the compensation frameworks. This is exactly the kind of work I do, and I want to make sure it's done right." Amara considered. She'd been planning to hire outside counsel anyway. "What's your fee structure?" "For this? Pro bono. Like I said on the plane, this matters. What you're building here could become a model for how other airlines handle discrimination complaints. I want to be part of making that model work." You're hired. Monica will send you the relevant sections of my proposal to the airline. Start thinking about what an independent review panel should look like. On it. Over the next week, the story continued to evolve. The hashtag #FirstClassFraud had fully transformed into a movement, with thousands of people sharing their own experiences of discrimination while traveling. Black women posted photos of themselves in first class with captions like, "I belong here," and "My ticket is valid." Airlines scrambled to review their policies. Flight attendant unions issued statements about the importance of dignity and respect. Janelle Reed tried to control her own narrative. She posted a tearful video apology on her social media, claiming she'd made a mistake, that she wasn't racist, that she'd been following what she thought were proper procedures. The video got ratioed into oblivion. Comments ranged from, "You assaulted someone and broadcast them without consent," to, "Your procedures were based on racism. Full stop." Her follower count dropped from 47,000 to 12,000 in 3 days. Derek Kane stayed silent, which was probably the smartest thing he could have done. His LinkedIn profile went dark. His Twitter account went private. He became a ghost. Meanwhile, Amara became unavoidable. The NPR interview aired on Tuesday and was immediately picked up by a dozen podcasts. The New York Times piece ran on Thursday with the headline, "The CEO Who Owned the Plane, How Dr. Amara Vance Turned Discrimination into Accountability." It went viral. But the interview that mattered most happened on Friday, on a mid-morning talk show that specialized in feel-good stories and celebrity gossip. The host, a charismatic woman named Deshawn Ellis, had built her career on being willing to ask the questions other interviewers avoided. "Dr. Vance, thank you for being here," Deshawn said as they settled into the studio chairs, the audience applauding. "I have to start with the obvious question. How does it feel to be the woman who owned the plane?" The audience laughed. Amara smiled. "It feels like proof that you should never assume you know someone's story based on what they look like." Let's talk about that. You stayed so calm in that situation. You didn't yell, didn't curse, didn't cause a scene, but you also didn't back down. How did you know that was the right approach? "Because anger would have let them dismiss me," Amara said. "Would have let them say I was being aggressive, unreasonable, difficult. I needed them to see that I was completely justified, completely in control, and completely unafraid. That's what made them question their assumptions." Deshawn leaned forward. "But should you have had to control your anger? Isn't that asking a lot of someone who's being discriminated against?" "It is, and it's unfair. White passengers get to express frustration, raise their voices, demand service, and they're seen as assertive. When we do it, we're threatening. I hate that double standard, but I also know how to work within it when I need to." You're asking the airline for major changes. Do you think they'll actually follow through? They don't have a choice. I'm not just asking, I'm requiring, as a lessor, as a shareholder, and as someone with the leverage to make this very expensive for them if they don't. But more than that, I'm going to be watching. I'm going to be in those training sessions. I'm going to be reviewing those quarterly reports. I'm going to be the accountability they can't avoid. "Some people are saying you're being too hard on Janelle Reed," Deshawn said, "that she made a mistake, that she's young, that she deserves a second chance. What do you say to that?" Amara's expression grew serious. "I say that her youth doesn't excuse her actions. She didn't just make a mistake. She weaponized her position and her social media platform to humiliate someone based on race. She put her hands on me. She broadcast me without consent. And when given multiple chances to back down, she escalated. Those aren't the actions of someone who made an innocent error. Those are the actions of someone whose biases were so deeply ingrained that she couldn't recognize discrimination even as she was actively committing it. Do you think she's actually racist or just ignorant? I think that's a distinction without much practical difference for the person being discriminated against. The impact is the same whether it comes from intentional hatred or unconscious bias. And honestly, I'm less interested in Janelle's internal thoughts than I am in the system that hired her, trained her, and gave her the authority to treat passengers that way without consequences, until she happened to target someone with the power to fight back. The audience applauded. Deshawn nodded. Last question, and this is the one everyone wants to know. What do you say to other Black women who might face this kind of discrimination but don't have your resources? Amara took a breath. This was why she'd agreed to do the interview, not for her own story, but for this moment. I say document everything. Record when you can. Get names, get badge numbers, get witness information. File formal complaints, even when you think nothing will come of it, because those complaints create a paper trail that can force accountability later. Connect with organizations like the NAACP, the ACLU, civil rights law firms that do pro bono work. You're not powerless, even when the system tries to make you feel that way. And I'm creating something specifically to help, she continued. Through the airline settlement, we're establishing a victims fund for passengers who've experienced discrimination. If you've been wronged, you'll have a place to tell your story and potentially receive compensation. But beyond that, I'm launching the Vance Passenger Advocacy Foundation. It'll provide resources, legal support, and direct assistance to travelers who face discrimination. Because I had leverage in that moment, but most people don't. This is me trying to share that leverage. The audience rose to their feet. Deshawn had tears in her eyes. Dr. Vance, you're not just demanding change, you're building it. Thank you. The foundation announcement hadn't been planned. Amara had been thinking about it all week, turning the idea over in her mind, but she'd made the decision to announce it there, in that moment, on a show watched by millions of people who needed to know that someone was fighting for them. By Monday, the Vance Passenger Advocacy Foundation had received over $2 million in donations and 5,000 volunteer applications from lawyers, advocates, and people who'd experienced discrimination themselves and wanted to help others navigate it. On Tuesday, the airline's CEO delivered the signed commitment letter. Every policy change Amara had demanded was documented in detail, with specific timelines and accountability measures. The Victims Fund was established with $12 million instead of $10 million, the extra $2 million coming from the settlement money Amara had refused for herself. On Wednesday, she sat in on the first training session with the airline's crew. 50 flight attendants filled the room, their expressions ranging from defensive to curious to openly supportive. The facilitator was Dr. James Chen, a civil rights educator who'd spent 30 years teaching bias recognition and systemic change. Let's watch the footage, Dr. Chen said, pulling up the recording from Flight 447. Amara watched the flight attendants watch it, watched their faces as they saw Janelle snatch the boarding pass, watched them flinch when she slapped it against Amara's chest, watched them shift uncomfortably as Derek fabricated policy violations. Some of them were seeing it for the first time. Others had already watched it a dozen times on social media. But seeing it in this context, in a room with the woman it had happened to sitting right there, made it different. When the video ended, the room was silent. Okay, Dr. Chen said, let's talk about what we just saw. I want to hear from you. Not what you think you should say, but what you actually think. What was Janelle's first mistake? A woman in her 40s raised her hand. She made assumptions based on race. Say more about that. She saw Dr. Vance in first class and decided something was wrong. Not because of anything Dr. Vance did, but because of what Dr. Vance looked like. Good. What should she have done differently? A younger man spoke up. Just scanned the boarding pass like she would for anyone else. The system would have verified everything automatically. Exactly. So why didn't she? Silence. Then a woman in the back said quietly, because she didn't see Dr. Vance as anyone else. She saw her as suspicious. And why? Dr. Chen pressed. Because she's black. Because she's black, Dr. Chen repeated. That's the heart of it. That's the bias we're here to recognize and interrupt. Now let's talk about Derek Kane. He arrived late to the situation. What were his options? They worked through the scenario for 2 hours, role-playing different responses, discussing how to intervene when witnessing discrimination, exploring the difference between following orders and following ethics. Some of the flight attendants pushed back, arguing about operational realities and chain of command. Others shared their own experiences being discriminated against, their voices shaking. During the break, a black flight attendant named Marcus, not the same Marcus who'd worked her flight to Los Angeles, approached Amara. Dr. Vance, I need to tell you something. I've worked for this airline for 16 years. I've seen what happened to you happen to dozens of passengers. Hell, it's happened to me when I'm flying as a passenger, And I never said anything because I was scared of losing my job. Watching you refuse to back down, it changed something for me. I'm not going to be silent anymore." "Good," Amara said. "And you shouldn't have to be scared. That's why we're building these new protocols, so speaking up is protected, not punished." "Do you really think this training will work? That people will actually change?" "Some will, some won't. But the system will change, and that's what matters most. When there are real consequences for discrimination, when there are actual oversight mechanisms, the ones who won't change internally will at least have to change their behavior externally. And over time, that behavioral change can shift culture." Marcus nodded slowly. "I want to help. With the foundation you announced, I know how the airline industry works, I know what passengers face, and I want to be part of making it better. Send me your information. We'll find a place for you." The training continued through the week. Amara attended every session, sometimes participating, sometimes just observing. She watched the flight attendants wrestle with uncomfortable truths about bias and complicity. She watched some of them have genuine breakthroughs, moments where you could see understanding click into place. She watched others remain defensive, unable or unwilling to acknowledge their role in perpetuating discrimination. But even the defensive ones were learning something, that this wasn't going away, that they were being watched, that there were consequences now. On Friday evening, as the first week of training concluded, Richard Chen requested a meeting. They sat in his office, Amara, Richard, Sarah Kim, and the airline's head of operations, a woman named Carol Stevens, who'd flown in from the corporate headquarters in Dallas. "Dr. Vance," Carol began, "I wanted to meet you in person to say thank you." Amara raised an eyebrow. "Thank you. For not destroying us. You had every right to go nuclear, file lawsuits, launch a media campaign, use your shareholder position to force leadership changes. Instead, you gave us a path to do better. Not an easy path, but a real one." "I didn't do it for you," Amara said. "I did it for every passenger who will fly on your planes in the future." "I know. But the effect is the same. We're becoming a better company because of what you demanded. Our discrimination complaint rate has already dropped 30% since we implemented the new approval protocols. Passengers are noticing the difference." 30% in 1 week seems statistically unlikely, Sarah interjected. "Are you sure you're measuring accurately?" Carol smiled. "You're right to be skeptical. Some of it might be measurement noise. But we're also seeing behavioral changes, flight attendants checking their assumptions, managers requiring more documentation before any passenger removal. The training is having an impact faster than we expected." "Don't get complacent," Amara warned. 1 week of good behavior doesn't erase decades of bad practices. I'm going to be watching those quarterly reports very carefully." "We know. And honestly, that accountability is valuable. We need someone pushing us, someone who won't accept corporate platitudes." They discussed implementation timelines, budget allocations, and the structure of the Passenger Advocacy Committee. As the meeting wound down, Richard walked Amara to the elevator. "Can I ask you something off the record?" he said. "Off the record doesn't really exist anymore, Richard, but go ahead." "Do you think Janelle is irredeemable? Do you think there's any path back for her?" Amara considered the question. "I think Janelle can grow, can learn, can become a better person, but that's work she has to do on her own. It's not my responsibility to rehabilitate her, and it's not the airline's responsibility to give her another chance at the expense of passenger safety. Maybe in 5 years, after she's done the work of truly understanding what she did and why it was wrong, she could work and travel again. But not now, and not here." "Fair enough?" Richard paused. "You know, when this first happened, I thought you were going to be the biggest problem I'd ever faced. Turns out you might be the best thing that ever happened to this company." "I'm not interested in being the best thing for your company. I'm interested in making sure your company stops being a problem for passengers like me." "Noted." The elevator arrived. As the doors opened, Amara turned back. "Richard, one more thing. I want you to remember that I had leverage in this situation. I had resources, connections, and power. But most people who experience discrimination on your flights won't. Every time you make a decision going forward, I want you to ask yourself, would we be doing this if the passenger couldn't fight back? Because If the answer is no, you're doing it for the wrong reasons. I'll remember. Amara stepped into the elevator, the doors closing on Richard's thoughtful expression. As she descended toward the parking garage, she checked her phone. Hundreds of new messages, interview requests, speaking invitations, people sharing their stories of discrimination and thanking her for fighting back. And one message from Keisha Washington, the young software engineer from Flight 447. Dr. Vance, I just wanted you to know, I flew again today, different airline. The flight attendant asked me if I needed help finding my seat in first class, and I just smiled and said, no, I'm exactly where I belong. She didn't push, and I realized I got that confidence from watching you. Thank you for showing me what refusing to accept discrimination looks like. Amara read the message twice, then saved it, because that was the real measure of success, not the policy changes or the training sessions or the foundation she was building. It was moments like this, one woman finding her voice because she'd seen another woman refuse to be silenced. The work was far from over. The airline still had months of training ahead. The victims' fund still needed to be fully operationalized. The foundation required staff, infrastructure, and sustainable funding models. There would be setbacks, there would be resistance, there would be days when the weight of trying to change an entire industry felt impossible. But right now, driving through Los Angeles as the sun set over the Pacific, Amara allowed herself to feel something she rarely permitted: satisfaction. Not at what she'd destroyed, but at what she was building. Not at the people who'd been punished, but at the systems being transformed. Her phone rang. Monica. Boss, you need to see this. The airline just posted their quarterly earnings report. They included a full section on the discrimination incident and the new policies. They're calling it the Vance Protocol. They're calling it what? The Vance Protocol. The passenger advocacy system, the approval requirements for removals, all of it. They're framing it as a positive change they're implementing industry-wide. It's good. They're not trying to hide from it. They're owning it. Amara smiled. The Vance Protocol. It was corporate co-option, yes, but it was also evidence that her demands had become so integrated into their operations that they now carried her name. That couldn't be easily undone or quietly abandoned. Send me the report. I want to read every word. She drove toward home, toward the rest of her life, toward the meetings and negotiations and fights that still lay ahead. But for tonight, she let herself feel the victory. Small, incomplete, but real. Somewhere a black woman was booking a first-class ticket without fear. Somewhere, a flight attendant was questioning their assumptions before acting on them. Somewhere the system was bending toward justice because one person had refused to accept injustice, and that was worth everything. 3 months after Flight 447, Amara stood in a conference room at the Los Angeles Convention Center facing 200 airline executives from 17 different carriers. The International Air Transport Association had invited her to keynote their quarterly summit on passenger experience, and the irony wasn't lost on anyone in the room. These were the people who'd built and maintained the systems that had discriminated against her. Now they were paying her $25,000 to tell them how to fix what they'd broken. She looked out at the sea of faces, mostly white, mostly male, mostly over 50, and saw the full spectrum of human response to accountability. Some sat forward, genuinely eager to learn. Others had arms crossed, expressions defensive. A few were scrolling through phones, present in body only. In the third row, she recognized Carol Stevens from her airline, flanked by 2 other executives taking notes. "Good morning," Amar began, her voice carrying easily through the room's sound system. "I'm going to start with a question, and I want you to answer honestly, at least to yourselves. How many of you, when you first heard about what happened on Flight 447, thought to yourselves, well, there must be more to the story?" The room shifted uncomfortably. A few people had the grace to look embarrassed. "That's the first problem," Amar continued. "The instinct to assume that when a black passenger reports discrimination, they must be exaggerating, misunderstanding, or playing the race card. That instinct is why these incidents keep happening. Because even when the evidence is overwhelming, even when there are 17 recordings from different angles showing exactly what occurred, there's still this reflexive doubt about whether discrimination actually happened." A hand went up in the back. Amara nodded. "Dr. Vance, I'm Michael Reeves from Pacific Airways. I appreciate what you're saying, But how do we balance taking discrimination complaints seriously with the operational reality that sometimes passengers do try to game the system? By investigating properly before acting, Amar replied. Your flight attendant on Flight 447 didn't investigate. She made an assumption, then looked for evidence to confirm it. Your flight manager didn't investigate either. He fabricated policy violations to justify a predetermined conclusion. That's not operational efficiency. That's bias with institutional backing. She advanced to the next slide, which showed a flowchart of the VANCE protocol, the passenger advocacy system her airline had implemented. This is what actual investigation looks like. When a crew member has concerns about a passenger's ticket, they don't confront the passenger publicly. They don't make accusations. They quietly verify through the system, and if there's a genuine discrepancy, they involve a supervisor who follows a documented protocol. At no point does the passenger get humiliated. At no point do we assume guilt. We verify facts and we treat people with dignity while doing it. Carol Stevens spoke up without raising her hand. Dr. Vance, I can report that since implementing this protocol, we've processed 43 ticket verification requests. 41 were resolved in under 2 minutes with no passenger interaction required. The other 2 involved legitimate booking errors that were corrected without deplaning anyone. 0 discrimination complaints filed in 3 months, compared to an average of 18 per quarter previously. Thank you, Carol. Amara turned back to the room. That's what happens when you design systems around dignity instead of suspicion. Your operations become more efficient, not less, because you're not wasting time on confrontations based on bias. Another hand. A woman this time, younger, with the exhausted look of someone in middle management. But what about crew members who genuinely feel unsafe? Don't they have the right to refuse service? Absolutely. Safety concerns are legitimate, but I feel unsafe can't be a magic phrase that lets bias hide behind policy. If a passenger is being verbally abusive, physically threatening, or violating safety regulations, there's documentation for that. There's observable behavior, but I feel unsafe because a black woman is sitting in first class isn't a safety concern. It's discrimination, and we need to be honest enough to call it what it is. The presentation continued for 90 minutes. Amara walked them through case studies, implementation strategies, and the financial argument for why treating passengers with dignity was actually good business. She showed them data from the victim's fund, over 400 validated complaints processed in 3 months, with an average settlement of $12,000 per case. The total cost to the airline was significant, but still less than the stock value they'd lost in the first week after Flight 447 went viral. During the Q&A session, a man with silver hair and an expensive suit stood up. Dr. Vance, I'm Robert Marchant, CEO of Continental Express. I have to say what you're describing sounds good in theory, but it seems like you're asking us to completely restructure our operations around a relatively small number of discrimination incidents. Is that really proportionate? Amara looked at him steadily. Mr. Marchant, how many discrimination incidents would you consider acceptable before restructuring becomes worthwhile? 10? 100? Because right now, your airline averages 27 discrimination complaints per quarter. That's over 100 passengers per year who feel violated enough to file formal complaints, and those are just the ones who bother to complain. Research suggests that for every formal complaint, there are at least 10 unreported incidents. So we're talking about potentially 1,000 of your passengers experiencing discrimination annually. At what number does it become proportionate to you? Marchant's expression hardened. With respect, Dr. Vance, some of those complaints are surely frivolous. With respect, Mr. Marchant, that's exactly the attitude that perpetuates the problem. You're starting from the assumption that passengers are lying, rather than the assumption that your systems might be failing them. And until you flip that assumption, nothing will change. The room had gone silent. Amara could feel the tension, some people agreeing with her, others bristling at being challenged so directly. Let me put it another way, she continued, her tone softening slightly. Every one of you in this room has built a career on customer service. You've spent millions on market research, on passenger comfort, on loyalty programs. You track every metric imaginable: on-time performance, bag handling, meal quality. But somehow, passenger dignity isn't one of those core metrics. Discrimination complaints get filed away in legal departments and HR offices where they don't impact quarterly reviews or executive bonuses. That's a choice you're making, and it's the wrong choice. She clicked to her final slide, which showed a simple statement in large text. Dignity is not a luxury amenity, it's a basic operational requirement. Here's what I'm asking you to do, Amara said. Go back to your airlines and ask yourselves, what would change if we treated discrimination complaints with the same urgency we treat safety violations? What if executives' bonuses were tied to reducing discrimination incidents the same way they're tied to reducing delays? What if passenger dignity was tracked, measured, and reported to shareholders alongside all your other performance metrics? She paused, letting the question settle. I'm not naive. I know some of you will leave this room and change nothing. You'll write me off as angry, unreasonable, or too focused on edge cases, but others will hear what I'm saying and recognize the truth in it, and those people will build better systems, and gradually, over years, the industry will shift. Not because everyone becomes enlightened, but because the ones who do will prove that dignity and efficiency aren't opposites. They're complements. The applause was mixed, enthusiastic from some sections, polite from others, absent from a few corners. Amara didn't need universal approval. She needed enough people to act. As she stepped down from the podium, Carol approached with two other executives in tow. Dr. Vance, this is Patricia Chen and David Morgan from United Pacific. They want to implement the Vance protocol at their airline. Patricia, a woman in her early 60s with sharp eyes and a no-nonsense demeanor, extended her hand. Dr. Vance, that was the most uncomfortable hour I've spent in years, and I mean that as the highest compliment. You didn't let us off the hook. That wasn't the goal. I know, but it's what we needed. Patricia glanced at David, who nodded. We'd like to hire you as a consultant, not for a token diversity initiative, but for real implementation. We want you to do for United Pacific what you did for Meridian, tear apart our systems, identify the failures, and help us rebuild around dignity. That's a significant commitment, Amara said. It took Meridian 3 months to implement the basic protocols, and they had strong incentive to cooperate. What makes you think your leadership will support this? David spoke up. He was younger, maybe 40, with the earnest energy of someone who'd recently been promoted and wanted to prove himself. Because we just lost a lawsuit. $3 million settlement to a family who was removed from a flight because a flight attendant thought they looked suspicious. They were Indian American, traveling with their kids, completely law-abiding. It was pure racial profiling, and it cost us, not just the settlement, but the PR disaster, the boycott threats, the employee morale hit. We can't afford another incident like that. So you're motivated by fear of consequences, not commitment to doing right. Patricia laughed. Dr. Vance, I've been in this industry for 38 years. I'll take motivated by consequences over indifferent despite principles any day. At least consequences drive action. We're prepared to invest real money in this. 7 figures for comprehensive implementation. We want training, protocol redesign, oversight mechanisms, everything. Will you help us? Amara considered. This was exactly the kind of expansion she'd hoped for, proof that the Vance protocol could scale beyond one airline. But it would also mean months of additional work, navigating new corporate cultures, fighting new battles against entrenched resistance. I'll need to bring my team, she said. Sarah Kim handles legal framework. Marcus Williams consults on crew perspective, and I have 2 civil rights educators who facilitate training. We work as a unit, and we don't compromise on core principles. Done, Patricia said immediately. And I want quarterly reporting to your board, with my team present to verify accuracy. Agreed. And when we find problems, not if, when, I need your commitment that you'll fix them even when it's expensive or uncomfortable. Patricia extended her hand again. You have my word, and if I fail to keep it, you have my permission to do to United Pacific what you did to Meridian, except we'll deserve it less, because we came to you voluntarily. They shook on it. David handed Amara his card. I'll have our legal team send over a contract proposal by Monday. As they walked away, Carol leaned in close. You know what you're doing, right? You're not just consulting, you're building a movement. In 5 years, every major airline is going to have some version of the Vance protocol because the ones that don't will be facing lawsuits and boycotts they can't survive. That's the idea. You could make a fortune from this. Why are you still flying commercial? Why aren't you just buying your own plane and leaving the rest of us to muddle through? Amara smiled. Because it's not about me avoiding discrimination. It's about dismantling the systems that enable it. I could insulate myself, private jets, executive terminals, never having to interact with the parts of the industry that fail people. But that doesn't help the 25-year-old software engineer flying to her first job interview. It doesn't help the family taking their kids to visit grandparents. Change requires proximity to the problem, and I'm staying proximate. The conference broke for lunch, and Amara found herself surrounded by people wanting to talk. Executives seeking advice, flight attendants sharing stories, passengers who'd experienced discrimination and felt validated by her presentation. She listened to each of them, took business cards, made connections. This was the slow, unglamorous work of institutional change. One conversation, one commitment, one converted skeptic at a time. Her phone buzzed. Sarah Kim. Boss, we have a situation. Janelle Reed is giving interviews. Amara excused herself from the conversation cluster and found a quiet corner. What kind of interviews? The redemption narrative kind. She's on daytime talk shows claiming she's learned from her mistakes, that she's been in therapy, that she wants to use her platform to talk about unconscious bias. She's crying a lot. Audiences are eating it up. Let me guess. She's positioned herself as a victim too? The young woman whose life was destroyed by one mistake? Bingo. She did an interview with Rachel Morrison this morning. Lots of tears, lots of, I was raised to see everyone equally. I don't have a racist bone in my body. I just made an error in judgment. No actual accountability for what she did, just performance of regret. Amara felt the familiar weight of frustration. This was how it always went. The people who committed discrimination got redemption arcs and second chances. Meanwhile, the people they'd harmed were expected to forgive, to move on, to not be angry. Is she saying anything actionable? Anything we can respond to legally? Not quite. She's careful. Her lawyer is clearly coaching her, but she did say that you used your power to destroy her career, schisma, over a misunderstanding, and that she wishes you'd given her a chance to apologize privately before making it public. I made it public? She went live on social media. She broadcast me to thousands of people without my consent. I know, the gaslighting is incredible, but it's effective. I'm seeing comments from people who think you were too harsh, that you should have accepted her apology, that everyone deserves forgiveness. Amara closed her eyes briefly, breathing through the anger. Set up a response. Not from me directly. I don't want to give her the attention she's clearly seeking, but get a statement from the foundation. Something that contextualizes what actually happened without engaging in a back and forth. On it. Also, you should know Janelle's being represented by the Morrison Group. They specialize in image rehabilitation for people caught in scandals. This is a coordinated campaign. Of course it is. Amara checked her watch. I have to get back to the conference. Keep monitoring and update me if anything changes. She returned to the main hall, where lunch was being served at round tables. Carol waved her over to a table that included Patricia, David, and 3 other executives from different airlines. The conversation over salmon and asparagus was surprisingly frank. The problem, said one executive, a black woman named Terrence Foster from Southwest Regional, is that most of our employees don't think they're biased. They genuinely believe they treat everyone equally. So when we try to implement training, they resist it because they think it doesn't apply to them. That's because most bias training is terrible, Amara replied. It starts from the premise that bias is an individual moral failing instead of a systemic feature of how we're all socialized. People shut down when you call them racist. They engage when you show them how bias operates in everyone, including themselves, and give them tools to interrupt it. How do you do that without making it feel like an attack? David asked. By focusing on behavior, not character. Instead of "you're racist," it's "that action had a discriminatory impact." Instead of "examine your prejudices," it's "let's look at patterns in who gets questioned, who gets believed, who gets the benefit of the doubt." You make it observable, measurable, and fixable. Patricia nodded. The training you designed for Meridian, is that approach replicable? Yes, but it requires commitment. You can't just do a one-time workshop and declare victory. It has to be ongoing. integrated into operations, reinforced by leadership. And critically, there have to be consequences when people don't apply what they've learned. What kind of consequences? Terrence asked. That depends on the severity and the pattern. First incident might be mandatory retraining and supervisor oversight. Second incident, suspension and formal review. Third incident, termination. But the key is that the consequences are transparent and consistently applied. No protecting high performers or long-tenured employees because they're otherwise valuable. Discrimination is a fireable offense, period. That's going to be hard to sell to the unions, one of the other executives said. Then negotiate it into contracts. Make it clear that discriminatory behavior isn't protected conduct. The union should support this. Their members are also passengers who face discrimination. Frame it as protecting workers and passengers alike. The conversation continued through lunch and into the afternoon sessions. Amar participated in a panel on passenger advocacy, fielded questions during a breakout session on implementation challenges, and endured a keynote from a consultant who spent 45 minutes saying nothing of substance while using buzzwords like synergy and paradigm shift. By the time the conference ended at 5 p.m., she was exhausted. Not physically, she'd given dozens of presentations over her career, but emotionally. Because every conversation, every question, every skeptical executive represented another battle in a war that shouldn't have to be fought. The fact that treating passengers with dignity required this much explanation, this much persuasion, this much evidence was itself evidence of how deeply broken the industry was. Monica was waiting in the hotel lobby with Amar's briefcase and a sympathetic expression. "You look like you need a drink." "I need several drinks and a week on a beach. But I have dinner with Patricia and David in 2 hours to discuss the United Pacific contract. I rescheduled, told them you had an unavoidable conflict." Amara looked at her assistant with genuine affection. "You're a liar and a treasure." "I prefer proactive problem solver. Come on, there's a wine bar around the corner that has excellent Pinot Noir and absolutely zero airline executives." They walked through downtown LA as the evening light turned golden, found the wine bar and settled into a corner booth. Monica ordered a bottle and 2 glasses without asking Amar's preference. She knew her boss well enough. "Okay," Monica said after the first sip. "Real talk. How are you actually doing with all this?" Amara considered the question. "I'm tired. Not of the work, but of the fact that the work is necessary. I'm tired of being the only person in rooms full of executives who seems to think passenger dignity is non-negotiable. I'm tired of watching people like Janelle get redemption arcs while the harm they caused gets minimized. I'm tired of having the same conversations about bias over and over with people who don't want to believe it exists. But you're not quitting." "No. Because if I quit, who fills the gap? Who pushes these airlines to do better? Who builds the systems that protect the passengers who come after me?" Amara swirled her wine. "I have leverage that most people don't. Using it isn't optional. It's a moral requirement." "You know what I think?" Monica said. "I think you're building something that's going to outlast you. The Vance Protocol isn't just a policy framework. It's becoming a standard. In 10 years, people won't even remember that it started with you. It'll just be how airlines operate. That's legacy." "Maybe, or maybe it all falls apart the moment I'm not there to enforce it. Systems are only as strong as the people maintaining them. Then we build systems that don't depend on single people. That's what the foundation is for, right? To institutionalize the accountability so it survives beyond any one individual." They were interrupted by Amara's phone. An unknown number, but the area code was Atlanta. She answered. "Dr. Vance, this is Captain Robert Hernandez. We met on Flight 447. "Captain, I remember. How can I help you?" "I wanted to let you know I'm leaving the airline, taking early retirement." Amara felt a twist of concern. "Because of what happened?" No, well, partly, but not as punishment." He paused. "Dr. Vance, I've been flying for 32 years. I've seen this industry at its best and its worst. What happened on that flight, what you did afterward, it reminded me that there are things worth fighting for beyond just keeping planes in the air on schedule. I'm retiring so I can work with your foundation, if you'll have me." Amara sat forward. "Captain Hernandez." "Call me Robert." "Robert, are you sure? You're giving up your pension timeline. I'm sure. I've watched you build something real over the past 3 months. I've seen the policy changes at my airline actually work. I've seen flight crews approach passengers differently because they know someone's watching, and I want to be part of expanding that. I have 30 years of industry knowledge, relationships with pilots and crew across multiple carriers, and a reputation that might help open doors. Use me. We'd be honored to have you, but I need to make sure you understand. This isn't going to be glamorous. It's going to be endless meetings, resistance from executives, fighting for every inch of progress. Dr. Vance, I've spent 3 decades dealing with FAA regulations, weather delays, and passengers who think yelling at crew will make their connection appear magically. I can handle difficult. She laughed. Okay, come to LA next week. We'll sit down with the foundation team and figure out where you fit best. Thank you. And Dr. Vance, what you did took courage. A lot of people would have just taken the settlement and walked away. You stayed and fought. That matters. After he hung up, Monica raised her glass. See? You're not doing this alone. You're building a team of people who believe what you believe. A team of 1 pilot and 1 very overworked assistant. And Sarah and Marcus and the 2 educators and the 400 people who've submitted applications to volunteer with the foundation and the 17,000 people who've donated money and the God knows how many passengers who've written to say thank you for fighting. Monica clinked her glass against Amara's. You're not alone. You're a catalyst. They finished the bottle while discussing foundation logistics, contract negotiations with United Pacific, and Monica's ongoing campaign to get Amara to actually take a vacation. By the time they left the wine bar, the streetlights were on and the temperature had dropped to something almost comfortable. Walking back to the hotel, Amara's phone lit up with a notification. Someone had tagged her on Twitter with a link to Janelle's interview. Against her better judgment, she clicked. There was Janelle, sitting across from Rachel Morrison, mascara running artfully as she described how she'd lost everything: her job, her savings while looking for new work, her social media following, even friends who distanced themselves. She talked about therapy, about learning to recognize her biases, about how much she regretted what had happened. I just wish, Janelle said, her voice breaking, I wish Dr. Vance had given me a chance to apologize privately, to learn from this without my entire life being destroyed. I made a mistake, but I'm not a bad person. I'm not a racist. I didn't know better. The comments below were a mix of support and criticism. Some people expressed sympathy for Janelle. Others pointed out that she'd assaulted a passenger and broadcast her without consent. A few noted that Janelle still hadn't actually apologized for the specific actions, only for the consequences she'd faced. Monica, reading over her shoulder, made a disgusted sound. She's not even sorry for what she did. She's sorry she got caught. I know. Are you going to respond? Amara closed the video. No, she wants my attention. She wants to make this about me being unforgiving rather than about her actions being indefensible. I'm not giving her that narrative. But people are believing her. Some people will always believe the tears of a white woman over the testimony of a black woman. That's not new. Amara pocketed her phone. But here's what matters. The policies are changing anyway. The training is happening anyway. The foundation is growing anyway. Janelle can have her redemption tour. I'm focused on making sure what she did can't happen as easily to the next person. Back in her hotel room, Amara pulled out her laptop and spent an hour responding to emails. United Pacific's legal team had sent over the contract proposal, more generous than she'd expected, with significant autonomy for her team. She flagged sections for Sarah to review and sent preliminary approval. There was also an email from Keisha Washington, the young software engineer from Flight 447. She'd sent it to the Foundation's general contact address, but someone had forwarded it to Amara directly. Dr. Vance, I hope it's okay that I'm writing to you. I wanted to share something that happened today. I was in a meeting at work. I'm the only black woman on my team, and my manager questioned whether I'd actually completed the analysis I'd presented. He asked if I'd gotten help with it, implying I couldn't have done it myself. In the past, I would have just accepted that, maybe cried in the bathroom later. But I remembered watching you on that plane, how calm you were, how you didn't back down. So I looked him in the eye and said, I completed this analysis independently, it's fully documented, and questioning my competence based on assumptions rather than evidence is inappropriate. He backtracked so fast. And after the meeting, two of my colleagues told me they'd been bothered by his comment too, but didn't know how to address it. We filed a joint complaint with HR. I don't know if anything will come of it, but I stood up for myself because you showed me how. Thank you. Amara read the email 3 times. This was why the work mattered. Not just the policy changes or the corporate accountability, but the individual moments when people found the courage to demand dignity. Keisha had taken the lesson from Flight 447 and applied it in her own life, in her own context, and she'd done it successfully. She forwarded the email to Monica with a note. This is what we're building for. Every conversation, every difficult meeting, every hour of training, this is the payoff. Monica's response came immediately. Go to bed, boss. Tomorrow we change more systems. Tonight you rest. Amara smiled, closed her laptop, and did exactly that. Because tomorrow would bring new battles, new resistance, new executives who needed convincing. But tonight she could rest in the knowledge that the work was spreading, taking root, growing beyond her direct involvement. The movement she'd started with a simple refusal to leave her seat was becoming something larger than any one person could control or contain. And that was exactly as it should be. 6 months after Flight 447, Amara found herself back in Atlanta, standing in the same terminal where everything had started. She was here for the Victims Fund Review board meeting, but she'd arrived early specifically to walk through this space again, to feel the echo of that September morning and measure how far the ripples had traveled. Gate 17 looked exactly the same. Same gray carpet, same uncomfortable seating, same departures board cycling through destinations. But something fundamental had shifted. She watched a young black woman in business attire board a flight to Chicago, her first-class boarding pass scanned without question, without scrutiny, without the flight attendant even blinking. Just routine service, just dignity as default. That moment of unremarkable normalcy was worth everything. Dr. Vance? She turned to find a woman in her early 30s approaching, hesitant but determined. She was petite, Latina, with nervous energy radiating from every movement. I'm sorry to bother you, the woman said quickly. I'm Maria Santos. I submitted a claim to the Victims Fund 3 months ago, and I just got the notification that it was approved. I wanted to thank you in person. You're not bothering me at all. Tell me about your experience, if you're comfortable sharing. Maria's eyes filled with tears, but she pushed through. Last year I was flying home to Houston after my father's funeral. I was in first class because my company had upgraded me as a courtesy since I was dealing with family tragedy. But the flight attendant didn't believe the ticket was mine. She said it must be a mistake that someone like me couldn't afford first class. Her voice cracked. She made me show her my credit card, my work ID, everything. She did it right there in front of everyone, like I was trying to steal something. I was so humiliated I just cried. I'd just buried my father and she treated me like a criminal. Amara felt the familiar anger rising, carefully controlled. Did you file a complaint with the airline? I tried. I called customer service, sent emails. They sent me a form letter apologizing for my negative experience and gave me a $50 voucher. $50. Like that somehow made up for being treated like I didn't belong in a seat I'd paid for. Maria wiped her eyes. When I heard about what happened to you, about the fund you created, I thought maybe someone would finally listen, and they did. The review board approved my claim for $15,000. But more than the money, someone actually acknowledged what happened to me was wrong. That matters more than you know. I'm glad the process worked for you, Amara said. Can I ask what you plan to do with the settlement? Pay off some medical bills, take my mother on a trip. Something good, you know? Something that turns that awful memory into something better. Maria reached into her purse and pulled out a worn business card. Amara's card, the one she'd handed to Captain Hernandez on Flight 447. I printed this from one of the news articles. I've been carrying it with me as a reminder that someone fought back, that we don't have to just accept being treated that way. You shouldn't have to accept it. None of us should. I know that now. Thank you for showing us. After Maria left, Amara stood at the window watching planes taxi and depart, each one carrying hundreds of people with their own stories, their own dignity that deserved protection. Her phone buzzed. Sarah Kim. We have a problem. The airline just filed a motion to cap the victims' fund at the original $12 million. They're claiming the number of approved claims is exceeding projections and they want to limit exposure. Amara's jaw tightened. How many claims have been approved? 873 so far, with another 600 pending review. Average settlement is running about $14,000 per claim. The math doesn't work if they cap it. Then they need to add more money. The fund was supposed to compensate everyone who'd been wronged, not just pay out until the money ran out. That's my argument too. But their legal team is saying the original agreement didn't specify unlimited funding, just initial capitalization of $12 million. Set up a meeting. Richard Chen, the CEO, their head counsel, and us. Today, if possible. I'll make it happen. 4 hours later, Amara sat in a conference room 40 floors above Atlanta's skyline, facing 5 airline executives who looked decidedly uncomfortable. Richard Chen had aged visibly in 6 months. More gray hair, deeper lines around his eyes. The CEO, Douglas Whitmore, was a silver-haired man in his 60s with the kind of corporate smoothness that came from decades of avoiding accountability. Dr. Vance, Douglas began, his voice carrying practiced warmth, we appreciate everything you've done to help us improve our passenger experience. The Vance protocol has been tremendously successful, but we have fiduciary responsibilities to our shareholders, and the Victims Fund is becoming unsustainable. Unsustainable, Amara repeated flatly. You paid your top 5 executives a combined $47 million in compensation last year. You spent $63 million on an advertising campaign. But compensating the passengers you discriminated against is unsustainable? Those are different budget categories. They're all your money, Douglas. You're choosing to prioritize executive pay and marketing over making victims whole. Own that choice instead of hiding behind the word unsustainable. The head counsel, a sharp-eyed woman named Jennifer Park, leaned forward. Dr. Vance, the original agreement specified $12 million in initial funding. We've honored that commitment. If you want additional funding, that's a separate negotiation. The original agreement specified compensation for victims of discrimination over a 3-year period. We're 6 months in and you've already received over 1,400 claims. Did you really think there would only be enough legitimate claims to use up $12 million? Or did you hope most people wouldn't bother to file? The silence was answer enough. Sarah slid a document across the table. This is an analysis of your discrimination complaint patterns over the past 5 years. Conservative estimates suggest approximately 9,000 incidents that would qualify for the Victims Fund based on the review criteria. At an average settlement of $14,000, you're looking at total exposure of roughly $126 million. The $12 million you've allocated covers less than 10% of your actual liability. Douglas's expression hardened. We're not agreeing to $126 million. That's absurd. What's absurd, Amara said, her voice cold, is that you discriminated against 9,000 passengers and think $12 million is adequate restitution. What's absurd is that you're trying to cap the fund while simultaneously reporting record profits. What's absurd is that you learned nothing from Flight 447 except how to minimize your financial exposure. We've implemented every policy change you demanded, because you had no choice, but the moment you think you can get away with cutting corners, you revert to type. This is exactly why the Victims Fund needs independent oversight, because left to your own devices, you'll find every loophole to avoid accountability. Richard Chen, who'd been silent until now, spoke up. Dr. Vance, what would you consider a fair resolution? Increase the fund to $50 million with a commitment to add more if approved claims exceed that amount. Extend the claims period to 5 years instead of 3, and give the review board full independence. No airline veto power over approved claims. $50 million, Douglas started. Is 4% of your annual revenue, Amara interrupted. You can afford it. The question is whether you're willing to prioritize making victims whole over protecting your profit margins. Jennifer Park exchanged glances with Douglas. We need to discuss this with the board. You have until Monday, Sarah said. After that, we file a motion to compel based on breach of the spirit of the original agreement. And Dr. Vance gives an interview to the New York Times about how the airline is trying to cap compensation for discrimination victims while paying executives record bonuses. Your choice. The meeting ended in tense stalemate. As they left the building, Sarah turned to Amara with a grim smile. You know they're going to fight this. Let them. The optics are terrible for them and they know it. They'll bluster, their lawyers will make aggressive noises, but ultimately they'll settle, because the alternative is another PR nightmare. You're getting better at playing corporate hardball. I've had good teachers, and I'm motivated by righteous anger, which is a hell of a fuel source. They walked through downtown Atlanta, the late afternoon sun casting long shadows between buildings. Amara's phone rang. Monica, with perfect timing as always. Boss, you need to see this. Janelle just posted on Instagram. I don't care what Janelle posted. You'll care about this one. She's announcing a new job as a diversity and inclusion consultant. Amara stopped walking. She's what? Yeah, she's partnered with some corporate training company that specializes in bias workshops. The announcement says she's uniquely positioned to help others avoid the mistakes she made. She's literally monetizing her own discrimination incident. Sarah, listening to the speakerphone, made a sound of disgust. That's beyond cynical. She's positioning herself as an expert on avoiding bias when she's never actually done the work to address her own. Send me the link, Amara said. Monica did, and Amara pulled up the Instagram post. There was Janelle, professional headshot, smiling confidently. The caption read, "Excited to announce my new role with Paradigm Training Solutions. After my own journey of growth and learning, I'm passionate about helping organizations create more inclusive environments. We all make mistakes, but what matters is how we grow from them. Ready to help your company navigate these important conversations." Link in bio for booking inquiries. The comments were predictably divided. Supporters praised her for turning a negative into a positive. Critics called it opportunistic and disgusting. Several people tagged Amara, asking for her response. "I'm not responding," Amara said firmly. "This is bait. She wants me to engage so she can play victim again, claim I won't let her move on with her life. I'm not giving her that." "But she's literally profiting from discriminating against you," Monica protested. "I know, and it's grotesque, but me saying that publicly just feeds her narrative. The better response is to let her actions speak for themselves. Any company that hires someone who assaulted a passenger and broadcast her without consent to teach them about bias is advertising their own lack of judgment." Sarah nodded slowly. "That's probably smart. But God, it's infuriating. Welcome to my daily reality. The people who cause harm get book deals and speaking tours. The people who survive it get to watch while staying quiet or risk being called bitter." They found a coffee shop and regrouped. Sarah had already drafted a response to the airline's motion to cap the fund. Amara reviewed it, made minor edits, and approved it for filing. They discussed strategy for the United Pacific implementation, which was running into resistance from mid-level managers who resented being told to change their procedures. "Robert Hernandez has been good at handling the pilot pushback," Sarah said. "Having someone from within the industry who can speak their language makes a huge difference." "How's he adjusting to the foundation work?" "He loves it. Says it's the first time in his career he's felt like his experience is being used to actually help people instead of just moving them from point A to point B on schedule. He's been invaluable." They worked through logistics until the coffee shop closed at 8 p.m., then parted ways. Sarah headed to her hotel to continue document review. Amara took a rideshare to her own hotel, exhausted but unable to stop thinking about Janelle's Instagram post. The thing that bothered her most wasn't the opportunism. That was predictable. It was the comments from people who genuinely believed Janelle had learned and grown, who saw her tears on talk shows and her therapy references and her carefully crafted apologies and thought that constituted real change. They didn't see what Amara saw. Someone who'd learned to perform remorse without understanding why her actions were wrong. Someone who'd figured out how to monetize victimhood while never acknowledging the actual victim. But maybe that was the world they lived in. Maybe the appearance of growth was enough for most people, even when the substance was hollow. Her phone rang. A number she didn't recognize, but the area code was from Washington, D.C. "Dr. Vance, this is Senator Patricia Morrison. I serve on the Commerce Committee that oversees aviation policy. Do you have a few minutes to talk?" Amara's pulse quickened. "Senator, of course. What can I do for you?" "I've been following your work with interest, the Vance Protocol, the Victims Fund, the training initiatives. What happened to you on Flight 447 was unconscionable, but what you've built in response is remarkable. I want to discuss federal legislation." "What kind of legislation?" "A passenger Bill of Rights focused specifically on discrimination. mandatory reporting requirements for all removal incidents, standardized complaint processes across carriers, federal oversight of airline bias training, and penalties for airlines that fail to address discrimination complaints adequately. Essentially, I want to codify what you've built at individual airlines into federal law. Amara sat down on her hotel bed, processing. Senator, that's ambitious. The airline lobby will fight you every step. Let them. I have the Commerce Committee chairmanship. I have bipartisan support from colleagues who are tired of constituent complaints about discrimination, and I have you, the perfect witness to anchor the hearings. Will you testify? Absolutely, but Senator, I need to be clear about something. I'm not interested in symbolic legislation that looks good on paper but has no enforcement mechanism. If we're doing this, we need real teeth, real penalties, real oversight. That's exactly what I want. I'm tired of toothless reforms that let industries regulate themselves into mediocrity. We need structural change, and you've proven that structural change is possible. Help me make it national. They talked for 40 minutes, discussing specifics, timeline, political strategy. Senator Morrison was sharp, practical, and genuinely committed. She'd done her homework on the Vance Protocol, understood its mechanisms, and had ideas about how to scale it through legislation. By the time they hung up, Amara had agreed to testify at hearings scheduled for 2 months out and to work with the senator's staff on drafting the bill language. She immediately called Sarah. We're going federal. What? Amara explained the conversation. Sarah's response was a mix of excitement and panic. This is huge. This could change everything, but it's also going to put an even bigger target on your back. The airlines are going to mobilize their full lobbying apparatus against this. Good. Let them, because we'll have something they don't. Actual victims willing to testify. Real stories, real harm. They can throw money at lobbyists all they want, but we have the truth. You're going to need to prepare for the ugliest fight of your life. I've been preparing my whole life. This is just the fight going public. Over the next 6 weeks, the pace became relentless. Amara balanced her regular work at Vance Aerospace Leasing and Vance Capital Partners with foundation duties, airline consulting, and preparation for the Senate testimony. She gave depositions for 3 separate discrimination lawsuits against airlines. She reviewed training materials for United Pacific's implementation. She participated in a documentary about airline discrimination that would air on PBS. She answered hundreds of emails from passengers sharing their stories. And through it all, she watched Janelle's profile grow. The diversity consultant business was apparently booming. Janelle appeared on panels about learning from mistakes. She gave a TED-style talk about unconscious bias that went viral. She published an article in a business magazine about building inclusive cultures. The irony was suffocating. But Amara stayed focused on the work. Because while Janelle was building a brand, Amara was building systems. And systems would outlast personal brands every time. The weekend before the Senate hearing, Robert Hernandez invited Amara to his home in Virginia for what he called testimony prep, but actually just making sure you eat and sleep like a human being before the biggest moment of this campaign. His house was a comfortable colonial in a quiet suburb filled with photos of his 3 decades in aviation and his family. His wife, Teresa, was a retired teacher who immediately adopted the role of caring but stern grandmother, insisting Amara eat a full meal before they discussed anything work-related. Robert tells me you're trying to change the entire airline industry while running 2 companies and a foundation, Teresa said, placing a plate of enchiladas in front of Amara. That's too much for one person. I'm not doing it alone, Amara protested. But you're carrying the weight of it alone. I can see it in your eyes. You look like Robert did before he retired, like someone running on purpose instead of rest. Robert smiled at his wife. She's not wrong. You're pushing yourself hard, Amara. Are you taking care of yourself? I sleep. I eat. I'm functional. That's survival, not self-care, Teresa said gently. What my stubborn husband learned after 32 years is that you can't pour from an empty cup. You need to refill yourself or you'll burn out. With respect, Teresa, I don't have the luxury of burning out. Too many people are counting on this work. Then let them help carry it. Delegate more. Trust your team. Robert tells me you have good people around you. I do. But ultimately, when I'm sitting in front of that Senate committee, it's going to be me answering the questions. Me representing everyone who's been discriminated against. I can't delegate that. Robert and Teresa exchanged the kind of look that came from 40 years of marriage, communicating in glances what others needed words for. Okay, Robert said. Then let's make sure you're ready. Let's run through the tough questions. Because the airline lobby is going to provide the senators with every attack angle they can think of. They spent the next 3 hours doing mock testimony. Robert played aggressive senators, interrupting her, twisting her words, implying she was exaggerating for attention. Teresa played the sympathetic but naive senator who asked questions that seemed supportive but actually undermined the need for legislation. It was brutal, exhausting, and exactly what Amara needed. They're going to bring up Janelle, Robert warned. They're going to say you destroyed a young woman's career over a single mistake, that you're vindictive, that this legislation is about revenge, not justice. And I'll say that Janelle destroyed her own career by assaulting a passenger and broadcasting her without consent, that what happened to her was consequence, not revenge. That the legislation isn't about any individual incident, but about systemic patterns of discrimination that harm thousands of passengers. They'll ask why you didn't just take the settlement and move on. Because settlements benefit individuals. Legislation protects everyone. They'll question your motives, suggest you're using this for publicity, to build your brand. My brand was fine before Flight 447. I didn't need discrimination to make me successful, but I'm using my success to fight discrimination. If that builds my brand, so be it. Teresa called a halt at midnight. Enough, she's ready, and she needs sleep. Amara stayed in their guest room, grateful for the enforced rest. But sleep came fitfully, her mind churning through scenarios, preparing for verbal combat, steeling herself for the attacks she knew were coming. Monday morning arrived cold and gray. Amara dressed carefully in a navy suit and pearls, professional but not apologetic, powerful but not aggressive. She met Sarah and Monica outside the Senate building, where a small crowd of supporters had gathered, passengers from the Victims Fund, members of civil rights organizations, and Maria Santos, the woman from the airport, holding a sign that read, "Dignity is not optional." The hearing room was packed. Media filled the back rows. Airline executives sat stone-faced in the gallery. Senator Morrison presided from the center of the dais, flanked by committee members whose expressions ranged from genuinely interested to openly hostile. Dr. Vance, Senator Morrison began after the formalities, thank you for being here. Please tell the committee in your own words what happened on Flight 447. Amara had told this story dozens of times, but never in a setting with this much weight. She walked through it methodically. The boarding pass challenge, the physical contact, the live streaming, the fabricated policy violations, the threat of removal. She kept her voice steady, her facts clear, her emotions controlled. Not because she wasn't angry, but because she knew anger would be used against her. When she finished, Senator Morrison asked, "And how did the airline respond once they learned who you were?" They fired the flight attendant, suspended the flight manager, and committed to policy changes. But Senator, that's the problem. They only responded because I had leverage, because I owned the plane, because I was a shareholder. What happens to passengers who don't have that leverage? Who gets justice for them? That's exactly why we're here, Morrison said, to ensure every passenger has recourse, regardless of their position or resources. Then came the attacks, led by Senator James Caldwell, a Republican from Texas with deep ties to the airline industry. Dr. Vance, isn't it true that you have a financial interest in promoting these regulations, that your consulting business stands to benefit from airlines being forced to implement the Vance Protocol? Senator, I provide consulting services pro bono. I don't profit from airline implementations. My financial interest is in running my aircraft leasing and investment companies, which would actually benefit from airlines not having to spend money on discrimination reforms. But you've certainly benefited from the publicity, haven't you? Your foundation has raised millions. You've become a celebrity of sorts. The foundation's funding goes to supporting discrimination victims and providing advocacy resources. I take no salary from it, and I'd happily trade my so-called celebrity status for never having been assaulted and humiliated on national television. Caldwell's expression tightened. Strong words, but isn't it true that the flight attendant, Janelle Reed, has maintained she made an honest mistake? That she's apologized repeatedly? Senator, Assault isn't an honest mistake. Broadcasting someone without consent while making racist accusations isn't an honest mistake. Those are deliberate actions with clear intent, and apologizing after facing consequences doesn't erase harm. So you believe she should never work in the industry again? That seems harsh for someone so young. Amara leaned forward slightly. Senator, I believe that people who assault passengers shouldn't work in customer-facing roles where they have authority over those passengers. I believe that people who weaponize their positions to humiliate others based on race shouldn't be trusted with power over vulnerable travelers. And I believe that protecting passengers' safety and dignity is more important than protecting discriminatory employees' career prospects. But don't you think, Senator, may I finish? You asked about Janelle Reed. What you haven't asked about is the 873 people whose claims have been approved through the Victims Fund. You haven't asked about Maria Santos, who was humiliated while grieving her father. You haven't asked about the thousands of passengers who've experienced discrimination but never reported it because they didn't think anyone would care. You're more concerned about one person facing consequences for discrimination than you are about the systemic harm being done to countless others. That tells me everything I need to know about your priorities. The room went silent. Several senators shifted uncomfortably. Caldwell's face flushed red. Senator Morrison stepped in smoothly. Dr. Vance makes an important point. This hearing is about systemic discrimination, not individual grievances. Senator Caldwell, do you have questions about the proposed legislation? The hearing continued for 3 more hours. Amara answered questions about implementation costs, enforcement mechanisms, and potential unintended consequences. She provided data on discrimination complaint patterns across airlines. She explained how the Vance protocol had actually reduced operational costs by streamlining legitimate verification processes. She parried attacks with facts, deflected attempts to make it personal, and consistently redirected focus to the passengers who needed protection. During a brief recess, Sarah grabbed her arm. You're doing incredibly well. Caldwell looks like he wants to sink through the floor. He's going to come back harder. The airline lobby is feeding him questions. Let them. You're winning hearts and minds in that room. I can see it. The afternoon session brought more challenging questions, but also more supportive senators sharing their own constituent complaints about discrimination. By the time Senator Morrison gavelled the hearing closed at 5 p.m., the momentum had clearly shifted toward the legislation. Outside, reporters swarmed. Amara gave a brief statement emphasizing the need for federal protections, thanked the committee for their attention, and declined to answer questions about Janelle or personal controversies. She was learning to control the narrative, to refuse the bait that would reduce systemic issues to individual drama. Maria Santos approached through the crowd, tears streaming down her face. You spoke for all of us in there, every word. Thank you. Other passengers from the Victims Fund gathered, sharing their own gratitude. Robert and Teresa appeared, Teresa pulling Amara into a fierce hug. You were magnificent, absolutely magnificent. We're not done yet, Amara said. The bill still has to pass. It will, Robert said confidently. You gave them no choice. The moral argument is too clear. That evening, exhausted and emotionally drained, Amara returned to her hotel to find Monica waiting with champagne and takeout. Boss, you need to see the social media response. You're trending, and this time it's all positive. Amara accepted the champagne but waved off the phone. I don't need to see it. Did we move the ball forward? The overnight polls show 67% public support for the legislation. 3 senators who are undecided have announced their co-sponsoring. The airline lobby is scrambling. You absolutely moved the ball forward. Then that's what matters. They ate Thai food and watched mindless television, giving Amara's brain permission to stop processing, analyzing, preparing. Around midnight, her phone buzzed. Senator Morrison. Dr. Vance, I wanted to call personally to thank you. Your testimony was exactly what we needed. Powerful, factual, and deeply human. We're fast-tracking the bill. I expect a floor vote within 6 weeks. Thank you, Senator. I'm available for whatever additional support you need. I know you are. And that's why we're going to win this. After hanging up, Amara sat in the quiet hotel room, letting herself feel the magnitude of what was happening. 6 months ago, she'd been just another passenger facing discrimination. one of thousands who experienced it and had no recourse. Now she was on the verge of changing federal law, of building protections that would outlast her, of transforming an industry's approach to passenger dignity. It had cost her time, energy, and exposure she'd never wanted. It had made her a target, a symbol, a lightning rod for both gratitude and resentment. But it had also given her something profound, the knowledge that power could serve justice when wielded with precision and purpose. The work wasn't finished. The legislation would face more fights. Implementation would be messy. Resistance would continue, but the trajectory was clear now, the momentum undeniable. Somewhere, Janelle was probably celebrating her growing consulting business, probably believing she'd successfully rebranded her discrimination as a learning opportunity. Let her. Because while Janelle built a personal brand on performed growth, Amara was building systems that would make it harder for future Janelles to cause harm. And systems, properly built, would win every time. The Passenger Dignity Act passed the Senate on a Wednesday afternoon in March, 11 months after Flight 447, with a vote of 63 to 37. Amara watched from the gallery as Senator Morrison announced the results, her voice steady but her eyes bright with emotion. The legislation wasn't perfect. Compromises had been made, some provisions weakened to secure moderate votes. But it was real. Federal law now required mandatory discrimination reporting, independent review of passenger removal decisions, standardized complaint processes across all carriers, and meaningful penalties for airlines that failed to address systemic bias. Sarah grabbed Amara's hand as the final vote was tallied. "We did it. We actually did it." "The Senate did it," Amara corrected. "Now we need the House." "The House will follow. They're not going to vote against passenger protections in an election year." She was right. 6 weeks later, the House passed the bill with even stronger bipartisan support. Another month after that, the president signed it into law in a Rose Garden ceremony, with Amara standing directly behind her as cameras flashed and reporters shouted questions. "Dr. Vance," the president said during her remarks, turned a moment of injustice into a movement for systemic change. She didn't just demand accountability for herself, she built accountability for everyone. This legislation bears her fingerprints on every page, and America's travelers will be safer and more dignified because of her courage. The applause was genuine, sustained, but Amara felt oddly detached from the celebration. Legislation was a milestone, not a finish line. The real work, implementation, enforcement, cultural transformation, was just beginning. After the ceremony, as officials mingled and posed for photos, a young aide approached Amara. "Dr. Vance, there's someone here who'd like to speak with you." She asked if you'd have a few minutes. "Who is it?" The aide's expression was carefully neutral. "Janelle Reed." Amara's stomach tightened. "Janelle is here?" "She's been lobbying against the bill through her consulting firm, testified before the House committee about the importance of giving employees second chances, about not creating cultures of fear where one mistake can destroy careers. She's in the West Wing visitors area." Sarah materialized at Amara's elbow. "You don't have to see her. You don't owe her anything." "I know, but I'm curious what she possibly thinks she has to say to me." They found Janelle in a quiet corridor, wearing a professional dress and carrying herself with the practiced poise of someone who'd spent a year cultivating a public image. She looked older than her 29 years, the softness gone from her face, replaced by something harder and more calculating. "Dr. Vance," Janelle said, her voice carefully modulated. "Thank you for seeing me. I know I'm probably the last person you want to talk to." "Then why are you here, Janelle?" "Because I wanted to tell you face to face that I'm sorry. Genuinely, truly sorry for what I did on that flight. I've spent the past year in therapy, working on myself, trying to understand the biases I carried. I've devoted my career to helping others avoid making the mistakes I made. And I wanted you to know that I've grown." Amara studied her for a long moment. "You testified against this legislation." "I testified about the importance of redemption and second chances, about not creating systems so punitive that people can't recover from mistakes. The legislation doesn't prevent redemption. It prevents discrimination. Those are different things." Janelle's composure slipped slightly. "But it makes it almost impossible for employees to make judgment calls without fear of federal investigations. It criminalizes mistakes. It holds people accountable for discrimination. If you can't tell the difference between a mistake and assault, between a judgment call and racial profiling, then you haven't actually grown. I have grown, Janelle insisted, her voice rising. I've done the work. I've educated myself. I've helped dozens of companies improve their cultures, but you won't acknowledge that because you need me to stay the villain in your story. Sarah stepped forward. Janelle, you assaulted Dr. Vance. You broadcast her without consent. You tried to have her removed from a flight based purely on racist assumptions. That's not a mistake. That's a series of deliberate choices. And the fact that you've built a career monetizing those choices while claiming victimhood tells me you've learned nothing except how to perform remorse. That's not fair. You want to talk about fair? Amar's voice was quiet, but carried an edge that made Janelle step back. Maria Santos lost her father and then got humiliated on her way to his funeral. Gerald Thompson, a black doctor, got handcuffed and removed from a flight because a flight attendant didn't believe he was actually a physician. Ashley Chen got questioned about whether her first-class ticket was legitimate while traveling with her white husband who faced no scrutiny. Those are the people who deserved second chances, Janelle. They deserve to travel with dignity. You took that from them and others like them, and you don't get to claim victimhood because facing consequences feels bad. I've apologized to me, publicly, for your career. But have you reached out to the passenger advocacy groups? Have you offered to work with the Victims Fund to help other people harmed by discrimination? Have you done anything that suggests you care about the harm caused rather than the damage to your reputation? Janelle's silence was answer enough. That's what I thought, Amar said. You're sorry you got caught. You're sorry it hurt your career. But you're not actually sorry for what you did. Because if you were, you'd be helping fix the systems that enabled it instead of lobbying against protections for the people those systems harm. You don't know what I feel. You're right, I don't. And frankly, I don't care. Your feelings aren't relevant to the work of protecting passengers. You want redemption? Earn it through actions that actually help people, not through performing growth while fighting against accountability. Janelle's eyes filled with tears, the same performance Amara had seen on talk shows and Instagram posts. I just wanted you to know I've changed. Then prove it by supporting this legislation instead of opposing it. Prove it by using your platform to elevate discrimination victims instead of centering your own journey. Prove it by doing work that costs you something instead of work that profits from your own wrongdoing. Amara turned toward the exit. We're done here. As they walked away, Sarah murmured, That went better than I expected. I thought you might actually punch her. The thought crossed my mind. But she's not worth the assault charge. Amara paused at the doorway, looking back at Janelle standing alone in the corridor, still crying, still performing. The sad thing is, she probably actually believes she's changed. She's convinced herself that crying in therapy and giving corporate workshops about bias means she's done the work. But real change requires reckoning with harm caused, and she's never done that. She's only reckoned with consequences faced. Do you think she ever will? I don't know. And honestly, it doesn't matter. The legislation passed. The systems are changing. Whether Janelle Reed personally grows or not is irrelevant to the thousands of passengers who will be protected by these new rules. They rejoined the celebration, where Senator Morrison was holding court with advocacy groups and civil rights organizations. She pulled Amara aside with a conspiratorial smile. I just got off the phone with the Transportation Secretary. The Department of Transportation is fast-tracking implementation. They want the Vance Protocol integrated into federal airline oversight within 6 months. That's ambitious. That's necessary. The public is watching. We can't let this momentum die. Morrison lowered her voice. I also wanted to tell you, there's talk of you running for office. The advocacy groups love you. You have name recognition, credibility, and a proven track record of getting things done. Have you considered it? Amara laughed. Senator, I appreciate the thought, but I'm not a politician. I barely have time to run my companies and the foundation as it is. Think about it. We need people in government who understand how to build systems that actually work, who can't be bought or intimidated. You'd be formidable. I'll think about it, Amara said diplomatically, knowing she wouldn't. Her power came from being outside the political system, from having the freedom to push without worrying about re-election or party politics. She could be more effective as a private citizen with leverage than as a junior senator trying to navigate institutional constraints. The celebration continued into the evening, but Amara slipped away around 8 p.m., exhausted and ready for quiet. Monica had arranged a car back to the hotel, where Teresa and Robert were waiting with dinner from Amara's favorite Vietnamese restaurant. "The conquering hero returns," Robert said, pulling out a chair, "though you look like you could use about 12 hours of sleep." "I could use about 12 weeks of sleep." Teresa dished out pho while giving Amara a knowing look. "Robert told me about Janelle showing up. Are you okay?" "I'm fine. She wanted absolution I'm not qualified to give and wouldn't give even if I were. But the encounter was clarifying. It reminded me why the legislation matters, because people like Janelle will always find ways to avoid genuine accountability unless systems force it." "She really tried to frame herself as a victim?" Teresa shook her head. "That takes nerve. Or delusion. Maybe both." Amara tasted the pho, savoring the complex broth. "But enough about her. Tell me about the Foundation's latest numbers." Robert pulled out his tablet. "We've processed over 2,000 claims through the Victims Fund now. Average settlement has held steady at 14,000. The airline increased funding to $73 million after your Senate testimony made capping it politically untenable. We're projecting we can maintain operations for another 4 years at current claim rates." "And the advocacy hotline?" "Receiving about 200 calls per week. 40% are resolved with basic information and guidance. 30% require intervention with airline customer service. 20% escalate to formal complaints. The remaining 10% involve potential legal action, which we refer to partnered civil rights firms." "Success rate on interventions?" 87% result in satisfactory resolution for the passenger. The airlines are learning that fighting us is expensive and counterproductive." "Good. What about training implementation?" Teresa took this one. "We've now worked with 9 airlines on VANCE protocol adoption. Results are promising. Discrimination complaints are down an average of 63% across participating carriers. Employee satisfaction is actually up, because clear procedures reduce confrontational situations that stress crew members. And operational efficiency has improved because the streamlined verification process is faster than the old confrontational approach." Amara felt something loosen in her chest, the first real relaxation she'd experienced in months. The work was spreading, taking root, proving sustainable. This wasn't just a momentary victory that would fade when media attention moved elsewhere. This was systemic change that would outlast her personal involvement. "There's one more thing," Robert said carefully. "We've been approached by international carriers. Airlines in Europe, Asia, and South America want to implement the VANCE protocol. They're seeing the results from U.S. carriers and recognizing they have similar problems. This could go global. That's a much bigger operation than what we're currently set up for." "I know, which is why I think it's time to consider expanding the foundation, hiring full-time staff, opening regional offices, building infrastructure that can scale. You've proven the concept. Now let's industrialize it." Amara considered. She'd been running the foundation with a lean team of consultants and volunteers, keeping overhead low and operations focused. But Robert was right. Demand was outstripping capacity. If they wanted to truly transform the industry globally, they needed to build an organization capable of sustained large-scale implementation. "Put together a proposal," she said. "Budget, staffing plan, timeline. We'll review it next month and decide how to move forward." They finished dinner while discussing logistics, challenges, and opportunities. Around 10 p.m., Teresa declared mandatory rest time and physically escorted Amara to the guest room. "You've changed the world enough for one day," Teresa said firmly. "Tomorrow you can change it more. Tonight you sleep." Amara did sleep deeply and dreamlessly for the first time in weeks. When she woke the next morning, sunlight was streaming through unfamiliar windows and the smell of coffee was drifting up the stairs. She checked her phone to find hundreds of messages, congratulations, interview requests, speaking invitations, and one that made her pause. It was from Keisha Washington, the young software engineer. "Dr. Vance, I just got promoted to senior engineer. My manager, the one who questioned my competence last year, actually apologized during my review. He said watching the Senate hearings made him reflect on his own biases. He admitted he'd doubted me based on assumptions, and he thanked me for calling him out. I never thought I'd see that kind of accountability." Thank you for showing all of us what's possible when we refuse to accept less than we deserve. Amara read the message 3 times, then forwarded it to Sarah, Monica, Robert, and the rest of her core team with a note. This is why we do it. The responses came quickly. Sarah, damn right. Monica, making me cry at my desk, boss. Robert, one changed mind at a time. Downstairs, Teresa had prepared a full breakfast spread. You're eating before you check email, make calls, or save any more of the world. Yes, ma'am. Over pancakes and bacon, Robert brought up something he'd been holding back. I've been thinking about Janelle. Not about her specifically, but about the broader question of redemption. How do we build systems that hold people accountable but also allow for genuine growth? Amar considered while pouring syrup. I think the mistake is assuming accountability and growth are incompatible. Real growth requires accountability. You can't become better without first acknowledging and addressing the harm you caused. Janelle wants the benefits of redemption, career rehabilitation, public forgiveness, restored reputation, without doing the work of actually making amends. That's not growth. That's image management. So what would real amends look like? For Janelle, honestly acknowledging what she did without minimizing it, reaching out to discrimination victims to understand their experiences, using her platform to elevate their voices instead of centering her own journey, supporting the legislation she testified against, doing work that actually helps the people harmed by the systems she participated in, and doing all of that without expecting praise or redemption in return, doing it because it's right, not because it rehabilitates her image. Teresa nodded. But she won't do that, will she? Probably not, because it would require genuine humility and a willingness to accept that some harm can't be fully repaired. It's easier to perform growth than to actually change. So she just gets to keep profiting from what she did? In the short term, maybe. But the market for diversity consultants who've never actually done anti-racism work is going to shrink as companies get smarter about vetting credentials. And the people she's consulting for now will eventually realize that someone who can't acknowledge their own discriminatory actions isn't qualified to help others address theirs. Amara smiled grimly. The arc of accountability is long, but it bends toward consequences. After breakfast, Amara finally checked her full inbox. Among the congratulations and requests was an email from Douglas Whitmore, the airline CEO who'd initially tried to cap the victims' fund. Dr. Vance, congratulations on the passage of the Passenger Dignity Act. I'm writing to request a meeting to discuss our ongoing implementation of the Vance Protocol and how we can align with the new federal requirements. I'd also like to discuss your role moving forward. We've seen remarkable improvements in passenger satisfaction and discrimination complaint reduction. I believe there's opportunity for deeper partnership between our organizations. Please let me know your availability. Sarah's response when Amara forwarded it. He's trying to get ahead of federal enforcement by cozying up to you. Classic corporate move. Probably, but if it results in better passenger protections, I don't care about his motivations. Are you going to meet with him? Eventually, but I'm going to make him wait a few weeks. Let him sweat a bit. Over the next several weeks, Amara watched the Passenger Dignity Act's implementation begin. The Department of Transportation issued detailed guidance to airlines. Federal oversight mechanisms went into effect. The first reports started flowing in, documenting discrimination complaints, removal decisions, and airline responses. The transparency alone was revolutionary. For the first time, the public could see patterns of discrimination across the industry. And the patterns were stark. Certain airlines had dramatically higher complaint rates than others. Certain routes and airports showed clear demographic disparities in who got questioned, who got removed, who got treated with suspicion. The data confirmed everything Amara had been saying, vindicating her push for systemic change. The foundation expanded just as Robert had proposed. They hired a full-time staff of 12, opened offices in Atlanta and Los Angeles, and began coordinating with international advocacy groups. The Victims Fund processed claims at an accelerated rate. The training program scaled to reach thousands of airline employees monthly. 6 months after the legislation passed, Amara received an invitation to speak at the International Air Transport Association's annual conference, the same organization that had invited her to speak during the campaign for legislation, but this time as the keynote for their largest global gathering. Standing before 3,000 airline executives and industry leaders from 70 countries, Amara felt the full weight of how far the movement had traveled. "A year and a half ago," she began, "I was assaulted on a flight because a flight attendant made assumptions about who belonged in first class. That moment of discrimination was traumatic, humiliating, and infuriating, but it was also clarifying. It showed me that the systems meant to serve passengers were actually harming them, that policies designed for efficiency were enabling bias, that the people with power to change things weren't motivated to do so until forced." She paused, letting the words settle. What's happened since then? The Vance Protocol, the Victims Fund, the federal legislation, none of that was inevitable. It happened because enough people recognized that the status quo was unacceptable and committed to changing it. Airlines that initially resisted are now seeing better operational outcomes. Employees who feared accountability are now relieved to have clear procedures. Passengers who expected discrimination are now experiencing dignity. The audience was rapt, phones down, attention focused. But we're not done. The Passenger Dignity Act is law in the United States, but discrimination is a global problem. Passengers in London, Tokyo, Dubai, Sao Paulo, they face the same biases, the same assumptions, the same failures of systems that should protect them. The question is whether this industry will wait for each country to legislate change or whether you'll choose to lead it. She clicked to a slide showing implementation data from the 9 airlines using the Vance Protocol. These airlines, your competitors, are proving that dignity and efficiency aren't trade-offs. They're complements. They're seeing reduced complaints, improved passenger satisfaction, better employee morale, and stronger brand reputation. They're winning market share by treating people like human beings worthy of respect. That should be your competitive advantage, too. For the next hour, she walked them through implementation frameworks, cost-benefit analyses, and strategies for cultural transformation. She showed them the data proving that bias training worked when designed correctly. She demonstrated how transparent reporting actually improved rather than damaged airline reputations. She made the business case for dignity so compelling that resistance became untenable. During the Q&A, a CEO from a European carrier stood. "Dr. Vance, you've built something remarkable, but how do we sustain this momentum? How do we ensure this doesn't become another initiative that fades when media attention moves on?" "By embedding it into your operational DNA," Amar replied. "Don't make dignity a program or an initiative. Make it a fundamental operational requirement like safety or on-time performance. Measure it, report it, tie executive compensation to it. Make it impossible to ignore or deprioritize. That's how you sustain change, by making it structural rather than aspirational." Another hand went up. A woman from an Asian carrier. "What do you say to employees who feel these policies restrict their judgment?" "I say that if your judgment consistently results in discriminating against passengers based on race, you need better judgment. Clear policies don't restrict good judgment. They prevent bad judgment from causing harm. They give employees tools to make fair decisions rather than biased ones. That's not restriction. That's support." The questions continued until the moderator finally called time. As Amara stepped down from the stage, she was immediately surrounded by executives wanting to discuss implementation, consultants pitching partnerships, journalists requesting interviews. Sarah and Robert ran interference, collecting cards and scheduling follow-ups while creating space for Amara to breathe. In a quiet corner backstage, Monica handed her water and a knowing look. "You just changed global aviation policy. You know that, right? Half those airlines are going to implement the Vance Protocol within a year. You've made discrimination too expensive to ignore. That was always the goal. Make doing the right thing the profitable thing." Mission accomplished then. That evening, the foundation team gathered for dinner at a restaurant overlooking the water. Sarah, Monica, Robert, Teresa, Marcus Williams, the 2 training educators, and several staff members who joined in recent months. They toasted victories, shared stories from the field, and allowed themselves to celebrate how much had been accomplished. "I want to say something," Marcus said, standing with his wine glass. "Before Dr. Vance hired me, I was a flight attendant who'd spent 20 years watching discrimination happen and feeling powerless to stop it. I'd experienced it myself as a passenger. I'd seen colleagues perpetuate it, and I'd convinced myself that was just how the industry worked. But, Doctor, Vance showed me that powerlessness is a choice, that one person with courage and leverage can move mountains. She didn't just change airline policies, she changed how I think about my own agency, and I know I'm not alone in that. Around the table, people nodded. Several had tears in their eyes. So thank you, Marcus continued, looking directly at Amara, for refusing to accept injustice, for using your power to protect people who didn't have power, for building something that will protect passengers long after all of us are gone. This matters. You matter. Amara felt her own eyes stinging. I didn't do this alone. Every person at this table contributed. Every passenger who shared their story contributed. Every person who believed change was possible contributed. I just had the leverage to force the conversation. The movement built itself. But it needed a catalyst, Sarah said. It needed someone willing to fight when accepting a settlement would have been easier. That was you. The dinner continued late into the night, the team processing the magnitude of what they'd built together. Around midnight, as people began dispersing to hotels and homes, Robert pulled Amara aside. I've been thinking about what comes next. The foundation is sustainable now. The legislation is passed. The protocol is spreading globally. You've accomplished everything you set out to do. What's your next mountain? Amara looked out at the water, lights reflecting off the dark surface. Honestly, I want to get back to running my companies. Vance Aerospace and Vance Capital have been running on autopilot for too long. I want to focus on building businesses that create value without requiring constant crisis management. So you're stepping back from the foundation. Not stepping back, transitioning. The foundation doesn't need me in day-to-day operations anymore. It needs me in strategic oversight, making sure it stays true to mission. But you and the team are more than capable of running implementation. That's how you build sustainable change, by making yourself unnecessary. Robert smiled. That's very zen of you. That's very practical of me. I'm not interested in being indispensable. I'm interested in building systems that work without depending on any single person. That's the only way this survives long term. A month later, Amara flew commercial from Los Angeles to New York for a board meeting. She booked first class on the same airline where everything had started, curious to see how much had changed. The difference was immediate and obvious. The gate agent greeted her by name and thanked her for her business without scrutiny. The flight attendant scanned her boarding pass with a smile and directed her to seat 2A, the same seat where it had all begun, without hesitation. Throughout boarding, she watched crew members interact with passengers of all backgrounds with consistent professionalism and warmth. It wasn't perfect. Nothing involving humans ever would be, but the baseline had shifted. Dignity was now the default, not the exception. Mid-flight, the head flight attendant, a black woman in her 40s named Diane, stopped by Amara's seat. Dr. Vance, I wanted to introduce myself. I'm Diane Morrison. I've been with this airline for 18 years, and I want you to know what the Vance protocol has meant to people like me. For the first time in my career, I feel like the company has my back when I call out discrimination. For the first time, I see passengers who look like me being treated with automatic respect instead of automatic suspicion. That's because of you. That's because of all of us demanding better. Maybe. But you started the demand. Thank you. After Diane left, Amara returned to her work, reviewing contracts and financial projections for Vance Aerospace. Her regular work felt both foreign and comforting, problems that could be solved with data and negotiation rather than systemic transformation and political maneuvering. Her phone buzzed with a text from Monica. You need to see this. It was a link to a news article. The headline read, Janelle Reed's diversity consulting firm facing fraud investigation. Amara opened the article, skimming quickly. Apparently, several companies that had hired Janelle's firm were alleging she'd misrepresented her credentials, inflated her success rates, and provided training that relied heavily on plagiarized content from actual civil rights educators. One company was suing for breach of contract. Another had filed a complaint with consumer protection agencies. The article included a statement from Janelle claiming the allegations were motivated by people who couldn't accept her redemption and were trying to tear down a woman who'd worked hard to rebuild her life. Amara felt no satisfaction in reading it, just a tired recognition that people who avoided genuine accountability eventually faced consequences anyway. Janelle had tried to build a career on performed growth while skipping the actual work of change, and the foundation had proven hollow. She texted Monica back. Not our circus, Let it play out without our involvement. You're not even a little bit pleased. I'm indifferent. She made her choices. She's facing consequences. That's how systems are supposed to work. But I'm not investing emotional energy in her downfall. I'm focused on building, not destroying. The flight landed smoothly at JFK. As Amara deplaned, thanking the crew, Diane caught her arm one more time. I know you probably get asked this constantly, but I have a daughter who's 15. She's brilliant, ambitious, and she's already experienced discrimination at school, in stores, in ways that make me furious. When she gets discouraged, I show her videos of you, of your Senate testimony, of your speech at the IATA conference. I tell her that's what refusing to accept injustice looks like. You've given her a model of power used well. Amara felt the weight of that responsibility, the knowledge that her actions rippled beyond policy changes into individual lives and choices. Tell your daughter that she doesn't need to wait until she has power to demand dignity. She has power right now, in her voice, her courage, her refusal to accept less than she deserves. The world will try to make her small. She should stay big. I'll tell her. Thank you, Dr. Vance. Walking through JFK, pulling her carry-on behind her, Amara reflected on the journey from that September morning to this March afternoon. 18 months, one flight, one refusal to back down. And from that moment, a cascade of changes that had touched thousands of lives, altered federal law, and shifted an entire industry's approach to passenger dignity. She thought about Janelle, probably scrambling to salvage her imploding business, still not understanding that sustainable success required genuine growth rather than performed redemption. She thought about Maria Santos, who'd used her settlement to pay medical bills and take her mother on a healing trip. She thought about Keisha Washington, promoted and empowered. She thought about the 873 people whose claims had been approved through the Victims Fund, each one representing a moment of discrimination acknowledged and addressed. Most of all, she thought about the passengers who would never know her name, who would board flights next month or next year and be treated with dignity because systems had changed. Those were the victories that mattered most, the ones that didn't require recognition or gratitude, that simply made the world incrementally more just. Her phone rang. Sarah. Boss, United Pacific just signed a 3-year contract for ongoing Vance protocol implementation and training. That's our 10th major carrier. We're officially established as the industry standard. Good. Make sure the contract includes teeth, real penalties if they backslide, real oversight mechanisms. Already in there. I learned from the best. Flatterer. Anything else? Yeah. I got a call from a law school today. They want to create a course using the Flight 447 case study to teach civil rights litigation strategy. They're calling it From Incident to Impact, translating individual harm into systemic change. They want your input on curriculum. Amara smiled. Tell them yes. Education is how we make sure the next generation builds even better systems than we did. Will do. And boss, I know you're transitioning out of day-to-day foundation work, but I want you to know what you built here is permanent. This isn't going to fade or collapse. You created something that sustains itself. We created it, all of us. You're generous with credit, but we both know whose vision drove this. Anyway, I'm proud to be part of it. After hanging up, Amara collected her luggage and headed to the taxi stand. New York in March was cold and gray, but the sky was beginning to clear. She had a board meeting tomorrow, dinner with investors tomorrow night, and a full week of work that had nothing to do with airline discrimination. She was ready for it, ready to reclaim the parts of her life that had been consumed by crisis response and systemic change. The foundation would continue. The legislation would be enforced. The training would reach more employees. The advocacy would protect more passengers. But she didn't need to personally drive every aspect anymore. The movement had grown beyond her, which meant it had succeeded. In the taxi heading into Manhattan, she allowed herself a moment of pure, uncomplicated satisfaction. Not pride, that felt too self-centered, but satisfaction in work well done, in power used wisely, in leverage deployed for justice. She'd been handed a moment of profound injustice and transformed it into lasting change. That was enough. Her phone buzzed one more time. An email from Senator Morrison. Dr. Vance, the first quarterly reports under the Passenger Dignity Act are in. Discrimination complaints are down 42% industry-wide. Passenger satisfaction scores are up. Not a single airline has faced federal penalties yet, which suggests compliance is happening proactively rather than reactively. This is working. Thank you for showing us what was possible. Amara read the email twice, then forwarded it to her entire team with a simple note. This is what success looks like. Thank you all for making it real. The taxi merged onto the highway, Manhattan's skyline emerging through the afternoon haze. Somewhere in that city, in cities across America, across the world, passengers were boarding flights and being treated with dignity they might never realize they owed to a September morning when one woman refused to accept injustice. That was the work. Not the headlines or the legislation or the recognition. The quiet, unremarked shift in countless individual experiences. The steady accumulation of moments where dignity was protected instead of violated. The slow transformation of systems from instruments of harm into tools of fairness. Amara closed her eyes and let herself rest, secure in the knowledge that the work would continue without her constant vigilance. That was the greatest success of all. Building something that didn't need her to survive. Building systems, not dependency. Building justice, not monuments. The taxi drove on, carrying her toward whatever came next, while behind her, the movement she'd catalyzed continued spreading, growing, transforming an industry. One policy, one training session, one protected passenger at a time. And that was exactly as it should be.